Chapter 312. Behind the young men in embroidered clothes, the guards who were acting violently just now were now being carried by others. They were wailing incessantly, and one of their legs was bent at a strange angle. Li Xian's guards walked over from behind and stood quietly behind him. Their faces regained their calm expression, as if they were not the ones who broke someone's leg just now. At this time, the difference between professional guards and non-professionals was reflected. Li Yi once again realized the importance of bringing a few reliable bodyguards when he went out. People like Mississippi Lu who were always missing at critical moments would definitely starve to death in this line of work. Brother Li Qing, it's them? The leading young man in embroidered clothes pointed at Li Yi and the others, and said loudly to the young man beside him. After saying that, he gritted his teeth and looked at the little fatty opposite him, who had his head held high and chest out, as if his eyes were about to spit fire. It's just child's play. Don't you think you've gone too far by doing this? The young man walked forward and looked at Li Yi with a frown. As he spoke, he was also sizing up the people opposite him. In the capital city, he knew all the young men of similar age with a background. He even met a few of the emperor's princes a few times. These two people obviously did not belong to any of them. However, they dared to ignore High Duke Chen's residence. The dignity of a High Duke was only worth a leg in their eyes. If they did not really have a powerful background, then they were lunatics. However, before figuring out the identity of the other party, he would not go too far. He first tried to sound them out. Seeing that the other party was frowning and looking at him as if he wanted to seek justice for those people, Li Yi sighed in his heart. This was how the world was. The right was always in the hands of the few, the rich and the powerful. When he tried to reason with them, they insisted on using force. When they lost to Li Xian's guards in terms of force, they turned around and tried to reason with him. This was not the way to bully people, right? All the young masters and young mistresses present can testify that our young master clearly said just now that the children's affairs will be dealt with by themselves and did not intervene in the quarrel between the young masters. However, your family's guards actually bullied the young. I'm afraid that this is damaging to the dignity of High Duke Chen, isn't it? The servants of the Li family also felt that the young man was distorting the truth. Those people's legs were broken, but what did it have to do with their young master? It was obvious that they were blind and offended that young master, which caused the disaster. The Li family was not going to take the blame. Not bad. Indeed. The surrounding young masters and young ladies nodded in agreement. Although it was unreasonable for the young master to allow the little fatty to fight with a few children, he still knew his limits. On the other hand, Duke Chen's guard actually disregarded his status and attacked a child. It was a little too shameless. Moreover, in the beginning, it was the few kids from High Duke Chen's family who provoked them first. The little fatty was not weak at all. After what happened just now, he had already won a good impression in everyone's hearts. As for the bodyguards who had their legs broken, they had only themselves to blame. How could someone who could bring so many powerful bodyguards with him be an ordinary person? The house of High Duke Chen might be a colossus in the eyes of ordinary people, but what kind of place was the capital? There might not be many people who did not respect the house of High Duke Chen, but a few bodyguards who relied on their master's power would not be taken seriously. Feeling the gazes from the surrounding people, the young man felt a little embarrassed. He said, even if they are in the wrong, isn't it too cruel to break people's legs so easily? Li Yi realized that this guy seemed to have set his sights on him. From the beginning to the end, he only broke one person's arm and sent another flying with a kick. The person who broke their legs was standing behind Li Xian. Every injustice had its perpetrator, and every debt had its debtor. If he had the ability, he could go and find them. What was the logic of always coming after him? Moreover, what was so cruel about breaking a person's leg? That guy wanted to be Li Xian's father and be brothers with the emperor. It was already benevolent of His Highness that he was not beaten to death. Even if he went up and slapped Li Xian twice or kicked him twice, his crime would be much lighter than calling himself father in front of him. In the end, there were still people who were reasonable. A guard with a broken leg couldn't help but point at Li Xian's group and said, "Young Master Cheng, our injuries were done by those people." Chen Liqing had the thought of personally breaking his other leg. Damn it, can't you just say it all at once? After talking for so long, you haven't even found the culprit. Are you kidding me? At this moment he was also secretly cursing his bad luck. Why couldn't they just stay at home? Why did they have to bring a few friends to the Cold Mountain Temple to enjoy the plum blossoms? What was even worse was that they had brought the little devil of their family. He was just an ordinary collateral family member of the Qin family. He had neither money nor status. The little devil in front of him with purple eye sockets was the treasure of the Chen family. If he didn't handle it well today, he wouldn't be able to explain himself when he went back. Why don't we go to the temple and find a place to sit? Li Xian turned his head to look at Li Yi and suggested. Li Yi agreed with his idea very much. It didn't feel good to stand here and be stared at like a monkey. The naughty kid's face was bruised, and he had to find a place to apply some medicine. Stop. Seeing that the two people seemed to be really planning to leave, Chen Liqing stepped forward and said loudly, "Don't you think you owe us an explanation? What do you want? Just say it." Li Xian pointed at a few guards. They understood and stepped forward to stand in front of the crowd. Li Xian looked at them and said impatiently, "Do you want to come one by one or all at once?" Arrogant, too arrogant. This was the most intuitive feeling of Chen Liqing and the men behind him. That person looks gentle, like someone who has been educated. How can he be so rude? Let's sit down and talk. If the other party also has a strong background, we just need to apologize and symbolically break a few legs. Both of us will have face and the matter will be solved perfectly. Do we have to fight? All the guards who have martial arts on their side have their legs broken. How can a few scholars fight with those people? Aren't they courting death? Compared to Chen Liqing and the others, the surrounding people felt differently. Especially the eyes of the young women under the veil, they were all quietly glowing. The surrounding crowd naturally had to stand on the side of truth. High Duke Chen's servants used their power to bully others. Chen Liqing was just continuing to be vicious. As for the two young masters, they were obviously in the right. Of course, the most important thing was that the two of them were really handsome. Humph, we are scholars. How can we be like those boorish people in the mountains? Chen Liqing snorted coldly. A disdainful expression appeared on his face, covering the fear just now. He said, "Why don't we have a civil battle? If you win, we will let bygones be bygones. If we win, you need to personally apologize, and the person who attacked just now will have to break one of his legs. How about that?" Chen Liqing wasn't stupid enough to use his shortcomings to compete with others' strengths. They were all scholars, so they should use a more refined method. It was better to recite poems and write essays. As for fighting, it was simply a disgrace to scholars. After they left, they would investigate their background. If the two of them didn't have any background, they would definitely regret being born into this world. Civil battle? Hearing this, Li Xian thought for a while and decisively shook his head. Too troublesome. Let's have a martial battle. Why don't we only send out 2 people and all of you come together? Chapter 313. As the saying goes, when a scholar meets a soldier, he cannot be reasoned with. That was how Chen Liqing felt. The person in front of them was clearly a scholar, but he did not follow the rules of a scholar. He was determined to fight with force instead of words. The other party's bodyguard was obviously an expert that had been carefully selected. Even if there were only 2 of them, the few of them were definitely not a match for them. Only an idiot would agree to a physical fight. Li Xian frowned and looked like he was in a hurry. He said impatiently, "Fine, if you want a literary fight, then so be it. What are the rules?" Seeing that the person in front of him was finally being reasonable, Chen Liqing was overjoyed. He said, "It's simple. It's the season for plum blossoms and we're in the middle of a plum forest. Why don't we use plum blossoms as the theme and compose a poem? Let everyone here judge who is better. This is a literary fight." With that, he whispered to the person beside him, "Hurry and invite young Master Shen over. It's your turn." Li Xian crossed his arms and glanced at Li Yi. Once again he looked like he was watching a good show. The ball went around in a circle and returned to Li Yi. There's no need for a literary fight. Li Yi was more inclined to Li Xian's suggestion. What couldn't be solved with 1 fist? If not, then 2 fists. Clean and efficient, without the slightest hesitation. If Mississippi Lu was here, she would have done this long ago. After spending so much time with her, it was inevitable that she would influence the way she did things. "Aha, if you're afraid, you can just admit defeat." Chen Liqing smiled and said, "You only need to apologize in person and break the hands and feet of those who attacked you. Then we can forget about this. What do you think?" After seeing the other party's hesitation, Chen Liqing was even more certain that they were just 2 idiots. The last bit of worry in his heart disappeared. "See, if they don't want to, then there's nothing to talk about," Li Xian said with a hint of schadenfreude. The scholars of Qin and Prefecture had already been harmed by him. The mere mention of the name Li Yi would make one's heart tremble. He was very happy to see the same thing happen in the capital. Only then would it be fair. Whispers of discussion could be heard from the surroundings. This Qin Liqing is also a genius with a little bit of fame, but he doesn't know right from wrong and acts shamelessly. Today has really opened my eyes. The people around him are all famous talents in the capital. In terms of poetry, how could those two young masters possibly compete with him? Look, he even invited young Master Shin here. Could it be that, although young Master Shin hasn't been in the capital for long, he made a name for himself during the Lantern Festival, using his poetry to win over most of the scholars? I heard that he intends to curry favor with the Qin family. Looks like Qin Liqing really doesn't care about his reputation anymore in order to win. Even though the surrounding scholars and young ladies were mostly standing on the side of Li Yi and Li Xian, they didn't think that they would be able to win. How could two nameless people compare to those outstanding scholars? What's more, there was a top talent like young Master Shin holding the fort. Does it hurt? Li Yi wiped the dust off the fatty's face and asked. No. Even though he grimaced in pain from being touched, he only breathed in and out, but he didn't admit it at all. He patted his chest and said, "This kid has some backbone." When the fatty showed off his prowess, Li Xian was also there. He walked over and patted his shoulder. Hearing the compliments, the fatty puffed out his chest even more. He held the young lady's hand like a victorious rooster. "Brother Shin, you're here." When a young man walked over, Qin Liqing smiled and went to greet him. The young man called Brother Shin cupped his hands and said, "I wonder why Brother Qin called me over? I do have something to trouble Brother Shin with." Qin Liqing smiled and said, "Let's go over and talk." "Ah, we're all friends, there's no need to be so formal." The young man looked at Qin Liqing in surprise and said with a smile, but he kept an eye on Qin Liqing. He knew that even though he called these people brothers on the surface, they were all from wealthy families in the capital. He was just an outsider. With the difference in status, they wouldn't treat him as a friend. Moreover, the scholars of the capital and Qin and had always looked down on each other. If it weren't for the fact that he had no background in the capital and needed their help, and the fact that they needed his poetry, they wouldn't be so friendly on the surface. As he brought him over, Qin Liqing briefly explained what had happened. He smiled, "We are scholars, so we're not like those boorish mountain people who rely on strength to win. It's a disgrace to our culture. But if it's a battle of words, we'll need Brother Shin's help. After all, in terms of poetry, Brother Shin is still better. This way we'll be absolutely safe." "Brother Qin, you are being too modest. The Lantern Festival is just my luck. All of you here are famous scholars in the capital. How could I dare to show off in front of you all?" The young man cupped his hands and said. The two complimented each other, and the crowd automatically opened up a path for them. Qin Liqing walked to the front and looked at Li Yi. "For the sake of fairness, each side will send one scholar to fight, and one poem will decide the winner." He still wanted to save face in front of others. He couldn't let a group of famous scholars bully two nameless juniors. As long as Xin Zhao made a move, it would be enough to sweep them away. Even though Xin Zhao came from Qin, and it was said that when he was there he was quite famous. In terms of poetry, there weren't many in the capital who could guarantee that they could beat him. With him here they wouldn't lose today. Li Yi helped the naughty child dust off his body and turned around. Xin Zhao's heart sank when he saw that silhouette when he walked over from the other side. When that person turned around and saw his face, Xin Zhao's heart finally sank to the bottom of the valley. As the second scholar of Qing, and countless people followed him wherever he went. Countless young mistresses pursued him, and he could even make the prostitutes pay him money if he wanted to. Of course, this was all in the past. He didn't want to be the leader of the scholars of Qing and prefecture. Why did he come to the capital? It was because he didn't have the face to stay in Qing and prefecture. One poem, Immortal at the Magpie Bridge, and one poem, Shuidiao Getu, made him lose all of his pride there. It wasn't until he came to the capital and made a name for himself during the Lantern Festival that he regained some confidence. In terms of poetry, he wasn't afraid of Yang Yanzhou. He wasn't afraid of all the scholars of Qing and prefecture. He wasn't even afraid of the famous scholars of the capital, except for one person. That person was standing right in front of him. "Brother Shin, I'll have to trouble you with this poem." Qin Liqing walked over and patted his shoulder with a smile. After seeing Xin Zhao's poems, he had unparalleled confidence in Xin Zhao. He was also the one who was least likely to lose. If he could help him regain his face today, even if it was just a little bit of effort, it wouldn't matter if he managed to get on the Qin family's good side. Xin Zhao came back to his senses and finally realized what Qin Liqing wanted him to do. "Brother Qin." Xin Zhao turned around and looked at Qin Liqing with an incomparably serious expression as he slowly spoke. "I think you guys should fight." Chapter 314. Good. Seeing Xin Zhao open his mouth, Chen Liqing was just about to praise, "Good poem." As soon as the word good left his mouth, he suddenly realized something was wrong. He stared at Xin Zhao and asked uncertainly, What did you just say?" Xin Zhao sighed and looked at Chen Liqing. "Brother Chen, believe me, if you choose to fight, your chances of winning will be higher. Brother Shen, now is not the time to joke." Chen Liqing raised his head and narrowed his eyes. Xin Zhao's behavior was very abnormal. Although Chen Liqing did not think much of him because of his family background, he had to admit that he was very talented in poetry. It was not difficult for him to write a poem out of his mouth. Under normal circumstances, Xin Zhao, who wanted to curry favor with the Chen family, would not offend him over such a small matter. In reality, he had not shown any intention of refusing, until just now. Chen Liqing's gaze immediately turned to the young man opposite him. "What's going on? What's wrong with Xin Zhao?" Confusion appeared on the faces of the people behind Chen Liqing. For a moment they could not understand what he had just said. As for the people around them, their minds were even more muddled. "Brother Li, long time no see." Xin Zhao raised his head and raised his hands in a salute to Li Yi. For some reason, after seeing this person who had changed the course of his fate again, his heart was calm and there was not a trace of hatred. In these days in the capital, he often thought back to the past. After losing the pride of the past, he suddenly found that the frivolity and arrogance of his youth, in the eyes of today, was just a joke. That young man had woken him up with a resounding slap, letting him know that there was always a higher mountain. He had completely shattered his pitiful arrogance, but it had also made him settle some things that he had never had before. "Brother Shin, long time no see." To be able to see an old friend from Qing'an Prefecture here, Li Yi was slightly surprised and also raised his hands in a salute. Although the two of them had once clashed, there was no unforgettable hatred. To be able to see each other in the distant capital was not easy. Of course, the most important reason why Li Yi did not hate him was because he had taken advantage of him at that time. At this time, he faintly felt that the Xin Zhao in front of him was not the same as before. So they know each other. Everyone came to a sudden realization. No wonder Xin Zhao was unwilling to stand up for Chen Liqing. If that young master was an old acquaintance of his, then everything would make sense. Chen Liqing's face was a little embarrassed. He couldn't help but feel some resentment towards Xin Zhao. He sneered and said, "Xin Zhao, do you think that without you we can't compose a poem?" This time she didn't even call him Brother Shen. Xin Zhao smiled and said, "I know that my talent in poetry is far from Brother Li's, so I won't embarrass myself. Brother Chen and the other brothers are all famous scholars in the capital, brimming with talent. Naturally, you don't need me." He naturally understood the meaning behind Chen Liqing's words. He was afraid that after today they would no longer tolerate him. However, this was no longer important. These days he had been trying to cling on to others, and there seemed to be something stuck in his heart. When he said those words just now, he suddenly felt a long-lost carefree feeling. No matter how conceited Chen Liqing was, he wasn't conceited enough to think that his poetry was better than Xin Zhao's. He only thought that Xin Zhao's words were modest. However, even if he couldn't beat Xin Zhao, couldn't he be compared to a nameless kid? Have you all thought it through? If you really can't compose a poem, then admit defeat. Chen Liqing sneered and no longer cared about Xin Zhao. He looked at Li Yi and asked, "Why are you composing a poem? Go home and dream." Being forced to copy poems was something he had experienced many times. Li Yi had already lost interest in it. He waved his hand and said, "How old are you? What's the point of fighting all day? Can you not be so childish? Let's go." He patted the little fatty's head and turned to walk towards the exit. The little fatty hurriedly grabbed the little girl's hand and ran after him. "Big brother, wait for me." The one selling buns in front, "Wait a moment too." Chen Liqing stared blankly at their backs as they left. His face turned green and then white. There was a mouthful of hot blood in his chest. They left just like that. What was going on? Even if they wanted to leave, they had to apologize and break the legs of those servants before they could leave. "All of you stop right there." Chen Liqing shouted loudly. Just as he was about to chase after them, the young man who left turned around and revealed 2 rows of white teeth. He smiled and said, "If you follow me again, I'll break your legs too." After saying that, Li Xian laughed loudly. He was in a good mood and quickened his pace to chase after them. The group of people who were left looked at each other in dismay. The surrounding people who wanted to watch the show were clearly disappointed. They thought that there would be an exciting battle of words and 2 excellent poems. They didn't expect that one side would retreat without a fight. But thinking about it, they knew that they were no match for Chen Liqing and the other scholars. If they really went to compose a poem, they would be asking for humiliation. They might as well retreat shamelessly. Preposterous. Chen Liqing's face no longer had the slightest trace of elegance. His eyes were about to spit fire. Investigate. When we go down, we must investigate the background of those two fellows. He had suffered such humiliation. If he didn't avenge himself, he was afraid that his heart would never be at peace. Brother Liqing, why are you so angry? Left and right are just two cowardly rats. They don't even have the courage to fight a battle of words. I'm afraid that they don't have a bit of knowledge and can't even compose a decent poem. Left and right are two idiots. After today, there will be no place for them in the circle of scholars in the capital. Absolutely, absolutely. Brother Lu's words make sense. A person beside Chen Liqing comforted him, and the rest of the people revealed looks of disdain on their faces at the right time as they echoed one after another. As for the surrounding people, even though they felt that it was unfair for Chen Liqing to propose a battle of words, the two young masters didn't even have the courage to accept the challenge. Even though they were smart, they didn't have the backbone of a scholar. Haha, they don't have a bit of knowledge, idiots. At this moment, an undisguised laughter rang out from the crowd. The laughter was piercing to the ears. Everyone turned their heads to look. It's Xin Zhao. After discovering the source of the laughter, everyone was stunned. What are you laughing at? Chen Liqing glared fiercely at him and asked. Xin Zhao held his stomach and laughed until he was out of breath. He pointed at Chen Liqing and said, Brother? Brother Chen, on your waist, can I take a look at the fan on your waist? Seeing Xin Zhao's expression, Chen Liqing was shocked. Why would he want a fan at this time? Was this Xin Zhao crazy? It was said that once this person became crazy, he could do anything. If one didn't do as he said, who knew what he would do? A trace of fear appeared on Chen Liqing's face. He quickly handed over the fan on his waist. Whoosh. Xin Zhao waved his hand and opened the fan. He smiled and said, You wrote this Shuidiao Getu on the fan. I believe that Brother Chen likes it a lot? Chen Liqing took a step back. He thought to himself that he liked this Shuidiao Getu. What did it have to do with Xin Zhao? Xin Zhao stopped laughing. He looked strangely at the scholar who had just called him an idiot. He said, When Brother Lu writes a poem that surpasses this Shuidiao Getu, then you can go say that others are an idiot. He returned the fan to Chen Liqing and laughed. Brother Chen, you don't need to investigate him anymore. That idiot brother is Qingan Prefecture, Li Yi. Seeing the expressions of Chen Liqing and the other scholars change, Xin Zhao felt extremely carefree. He laughed a few times and turned to leave without looking back. Qingan Prefecture, Li Yi. Even though they didn't know what he looked like, this name was not unfamiliar to the scholars and beauties of the capital. Her pretty face was full of shock. Her cherry lips parted slightly and she took out the round fan from her bosom. There was the immortal magpie bridge that she had personally embroidered. In this world, the best way to become famous was to write an excellent poem. No matter where the poem first appeared, it would eventually be known by all the scholars of the Jing kingdom and be passed down for generations to come. How can this be? How can this be? Chen Liqing's mind was blank as he mumbled to himself. The scholar surnamed Lu's face was red. He wanted to find a hole in the ground to hide in. The surrounding crowd was shocked. A few poems involuntarily appeared in their minds. Under the curtain, the rich young mistress's pretty face was slightly red. Her gaze occasionally looked in the direction of the exit of the plum blossom forest. At this moment, no one would think that the person who left was retreating without a fight. That was disdain, he was right. Chen Liqing was stupid and childish to compete with the scholars who wrote Shuidiao Getu and Immortal Magpie Bridge. Xin Zhao was not being modest just now. From the beginning to the end, he had treated this matter as a joke. So what if it was Chen Liqing? So what if it was the gifted scholar of the Jing kingdom? Could they make all the women in the world whisper in their boudoirs? If the feelings between the two were to last for a long time, why would they stay together day and night and embroider their poems on handkerchiefs? They couldn't. Thinking of this, everyone looked at Chen Liqing with a strange expression. Chapter 315. In a room in the back of the Cold Mountain Temple. Ouch, be gentler, it hurts, it hurts. A servant of the Li family smeared the medicinal wine that the monks had brought onto the bruises on the chubby boy's face. The chubby boy, who had been hot-blooded and would rather be beaten than lower his head, continuously sucked in a breath of cold air and cried out in pain. It wasn't until a little girl stuffed a bun into his mouth that the room finally quieted down. Why have you come to the capital? Do you really have a younger brother here? Li Xian looked at Li Yi with a mind full of confusion, waiting for his explanation. Not only did he have a younger brother, but he also had 7 aunts and 8 aunts, even Wang Erniu from next door. To explain this matter to Li Xian, he first had to talk about the grudges of the previous generation. None of this is important. What's important is that I'm already in the capital, Li Yi said with a wave of his hand. He really didn't want to talk about those messy things again. He took a sip of tea and glanced at Li Xian. But didn't you come to the capital to finish your marriage? Why haven't you gone back yet? You're actually in the mood to discuss Zen with an old monk. This isn't like you. Could it be that after you got married, you've lost yourself in pleasure and even your personality has changed? If Li Yi remembered correctly, other than some special circumstances, a prince was not allowed to stay in the capital for long periods of time without the permission of the emperor. When he left Qing and Fu, Ningguang had already returned, but Li Xian was still here. It looked like he had no intention of leaving. Li Xian said gloomily, Uncle Huang said that sooner or later I will have to manage father's fief. He wants me to stay in the capital and learn these things from the officials of the court. I'm afraid I won't be able to leave the capital in the short term. Li Yi thought to himself that the emperor really was a busybody. He even had to worry about these things. Given the condition of his body, if he wanted to live to the end of his life, it would probably be up to luck. Thinking about it this way, it wasn't surprising to see him discussing Zen with the old monk here. With his temperament, he was absolutely suitable to be an idle prince, and he was even more suitable to be a scientist. Even if he was asked to govern a prefecture, a state, or even a county, it might be a good thing for the people, but he himself would definitely recite, My white hair is 3,000 feet long, and my fate is like a long sorrow, and die of depression. Li Xian didn't continue to ask why Li Yi was in the capital. If he wanted to know, it wouldn't take much effort. However, as he said, none of this was important anymore. The important thing was that with him here, the future would not be so boring. Suddenly, Li Yi thought of something important. He turned around, looked at Li Xian and said seriously, By the way, don't tell Emingzu that I'm coming to the capital. What? Li Xian looked at him with confusion. Emingzu was also very bored in the palace. In reality, he had planned to enter the palace today. If she knew that Li Yi had come to the capital, she would probably be very happy. The reason was, of course, if Her Highness knew that he was coming to the capital, she would certainly think of a way to make him stay. There was no doubt about this. Li Yi only treated this trip as a vacation. He didn't think he would stay here for the rest of his life. He had only left home for a few days, but he already missed Rui and Xiao Huan. Even when he saw a strong man on the street, Fang's face would involuntarily appear. This was an illness. He could only recover when he returned home. He sighed and said, To be honest, I'm only staying in the capital for a few days. In a few days I'll be returning to Qing and Fu. Although it was not very good not to greet her when he came to the capital, after thinking for a long time, Li Yi felt that it was better for the two of them not to meet. The feeling of his life and death being controlled by others was something that Li Yi, who had a soul from the 21st century, was not something that he was used to. Unfortunately, in a feudal dynasty like the Jing kingdom, the royal family had this kind of power. If there was no need, he didn't want to have anything to do with the royal family. Li Xian was already an exception. If he got involved with the princess further, Li Yi was worried that the days where he could lie in the courtyard and bask in the sun would be gone forever. Of course, if she was still the cool and disrespectful Constable Emingzu, he would be very happy to accept it. So soon? Li Xian couldn't help but show disappointment on his face. He didn't have the excitement from before. After applying the medicine, the little fatty became excited again. It was the first time he showed off his power in front of his enemy. Even though he was slightly injured, he couldn't hide the excitement in his heart. He held the food in his hand and walked around the room. Suddenly, the little fatty looked at the surrounding walls of the room. His eyes rolled a few times and he ran in front of Li Yi. He pointed at the strange marks on the wall and asked, Big brother, what's written on the wall? Although Li Yi didn't grow up in the capital, he was the number one among the younger generation in the Li family. It was normal for the little fatty to call him big brother. After what happened just now, the little fatty was full of good feelings towards this big brother that he had only met twice. Of course, he was more looking forward to having him teach him a few moves. When he fought with Chen Xiaotian, he would be able to send them flying with a kick. Just thinking about it made his blood boil. Hee, big brother doesn't study hard and can't read. The little girl skipped over and said with a smile. The little girl was also a member of the Li family. She was the daughter of a concubine of the Li family's third uncle. She was Li Yingxi's half-sister. Perhaps it was because she was too young, she was a little shy. She hid behind the little fatty and blinked her eyes curiously at Li Yi. Hearing this, the little fatty's face turned red. Although he didn't study hard, he could still recognize a few words. However, the words written on the wall were crooked and didn't look like they were written in a book. How could he recognize them? That's Sanskrit. It's normal that you don't recognize it, Li Yi said with a smile. You know Sanskrit? Li Xin looked at him in surprise. It was normal for the little fatty not to know Sanskrit. Li Yi grew up in Qing'an Prefecture. Under normal circumstances, he shouldn't be able to recognize it either. Once again, Li Yi confirmed that this guy must have dozed off in class when he was young. This was a temple. Buddhism originated from ancient India. Although the wheel of history had gone astray, it shouldn't be much different in this world. The earliest scriptures must have been written in Sanskrit. After being translated, it became what it was today. Li Yi had studied history carefully. In the early years of the previous dynasty, there was indeed a monk called Xuanzang who went west to India and brought back countless scriptures. However, it was different from the other world. After Xuanzang returned to his country, the Tang Empire was torn apart before he could translate the scriptures. Xuanzang also died of a serious illness. An eminent monk of that generation had fallen. Until now, those scriptures had not been completely translated. This was a temple. Other than Sanskrit, what else could those strange words written on the wall be? I know a thing or two, Li Yi said modestly without blushing. Of course he didn't know Sanskrit. Although there were Buddhist classics and even Sanskrit dictionaries in the library, he always felt that it was useless to learn it. Moreover, one couldn't learn a language just by knowing a few words. There was no need to spend so much effort. What's written on the wall? Li Xian looked at him and asked in disbelief. Not only could he write poems and lyrics, he knew a lot of things that he didn't know. But he even knew such an obscure language like Sanskrit. The gap between them was so big that it hurt his heart 10,000 times more. When Bodhisattva Amitabha was deep in the Prajna Paramitha, he saw that the 5 skandhas were empty, and he passed through all suffering. Form is not different from emptiness, emptiness is not different from form. Form is emptiness, emptiness is form. Perception, thought, action, and knowledge are the same. Li Yi said casually, this is the Buddhist scripture, Mahaprajna Paramitha Sutra. It talks about the path of Bodhisattva. Seeing that his big brother even knew these crooked things, the little fatty's eyes were already shining. Finally, Li Xian's face showed extreme surprise. Although he didn't know Sanskrit, Li Yi's words sounded very professional. Prajna Paramitha, Sarira, form and emptiness sounded very professional. Coupled with his trust in him, he didn't doubt that what he said was a lie. Young benefactor is indeed knowledgeable. In the previous dynasty, Master Xuanzang translated the Prajna Paramitha Sutra, but he only completed half of it before he reached nirvana. The other half of the sutra is still in our Cold Mountain Temple's sutra depository. I wonder where did young benefactor learn it? An old monk walked in from outside and asked with a smile. Master Tanin, could the Sanskrit on the wall really be that sutra? Li Xian walked over and asked the old monk skeptically. The old monk stroked his beard and smiled, shaking his head. That's the Diamond Sutra. Chapter 316. Li Yi was embarrassed. Thinking that Li Xian didn't know Sanskrit, he casually recited the Heart Sutra that Li Xian was most familiar with to fool him. The Heart Sutra was probably one of the most widely circulated scriptures in Buddhism in the future, especially the lines form is not different from emptiness, emptiness is not different from form. They often appeared in TV dramas. Even if you weren't a Buddhist, you could say it casually. It was awkward after saying it out loud. Being exposed by the old monk and Li Xian's playful eyes, he was put on the spot for a moment. So I heard, at one time, the Buddha gave a lonely garden in the country of Shitra, together with 1,250 monks. Li Yi laughed dryly and said, so it's the Diamond Sutra. I'm sorry I saw it wrong. Li Xian's face was full of disbelief. The two scriptures were so different, how could he have seen it wrong? Would a normal person think of the immortal magpie bridge as Shuidiao Gedu? If he was literate, he wouldn't have made such a mistake. So I heard, at one time, the Buddha gave a lonely garden in the country of Shitra. The old monk raised his eyebrows and looked at Li Yi with a serious expression. Could it be the Diamond Sutra translated and annotated by the later Qin monk, Kumarajiva? Legend has it that this translation was recognized by the monks at that time and was widely spread. However, it was lost with the fall of the later Qing dynasty. Where did you learn it? Obviously what Li Yi just said was not what was written on the wall. The atmosphere in the room became awkward again. Li Yi decided not to speak anymore. This old monk must be taking revenge on him for tricking him earlier. It was said that a monk's 6 senses were pure, without anger, but it was all a lie. He had never seen a monk who held a grudge like this before. Inkai, let's go home. Li Yi turned and said to the little fatty, then strode out of the room. Young benefactor, please wait. The old monk stepped forward and blocked his way. With Li Yi's level, he didn't see how the monk came over. He just felt his vision blur and a shiny bald head appeared in front of him. Li Yi was shocked, thinking that this old monk was not a Shaolin disciple. Could he be a spy of the Xiaoyao sect? This wave-like subtle steps had already reached the acme of perfection. Expert. Li Yi was absolutely certain that this old monk was an expert. However, he wasn't worried because under the guidance of a servant of the Li family, Mississippi Lu was already walking over. Is there anything else, Grandmaster? It was better to be polite in someone else's territory. Even if Mississippi Lu defeated the old monk, Rui wouldn't be able to deal with the 18 Arhats formation, Vajra demon subduing formation, and so on. A kind smile appeared on the old monk's face again as he asked, I just want to know where you learned the Prajna Heart Sutra and Diamond Sutra that you mentioned just now. Li Yi's heart skipped a beat. He finally understood why the old monk would do such a thing. Although the overall history of this world hadn't changed much, there were still many historical differences from the original world. The eminent monk of the previous dynasty, Master Xuanzang, traveled thousands of miles from India to retrieve the Mahayana Buddhism, but he died before he could translate it into Chinese. Many Buddhist scriptures could only exist in the form of Sanskrit. With the rapid destruction of India, there were fewer and fewer people who knew Sanskrit. Eminent monks who were proficient in Sanskrit were even rarer. For decades, there hadn't been a mighty person who could translate these scriptures, which greatly hindered the spread of the teachings. The old monk's dharma must have reached a certain level. He could tell the difference just by listening to a few lines of the scriptures. He might have thought that the scriptures had already been translated by an eminent monk. What's wrong? Lu Rui walked over. After glancing at the old monk, he stood beside Li Yi and tilted his head to ask. The old monk still had a kind smile on his face, but his gaze lingered on Lu Rui for a moment longer. I'm fine. Li Yi gave her a reassuring look. Since the old monk didn't have any ill intentions and didn't intend to use the 18 Bronze Men formation and the Diamond Demon subduing formation, there was no need to be cautious. He looked at the old monk and smiled. It's a long story. It was a winter more than 10 years ago. I only remember that it was very cold that winter. The north wind was biting cold and snow was flying everywhere. One morning I opened the door to find an old monk in thin clothes lying in front of my house. Perhaps it was because of the climate change, but more than 10 years ago, the winter in Qing and prefecture was much colder than it was now. Every year there would be a heavy snowfall. The north wind was biting cold and the snow would seal the mountains. Coincidentally, a famous doctor would fall in front of Li Yi's house this year. Next year, a Buddhist monk would fall, and the year after that an old Taoist would fall. In short, under the rule of Emperor Li Xian's relatives, the elderly in the Jing kingdom didn't have an easy time, especially during the difficult winter. Fortunately, the people of this era didn't lack warm-hearted people. Every time they found an elderly person lying in front of their house, they would kindly help them back. A bowl of hot soup and a quilt could save an elderly person who had one foot in the grave. Because he had the best audience in the world, with Li Yi's ability to tell stories, if he told stories in the brothel, the storytellers could only go hungry. Li Xian listened with great interest. He was very envious of Li Yi's luck of randomly picking up an eminent monk in front of his house. The gate of the prince's mansion was even more majestic and imposing. Why had no one ever fallen? It must be because those servants were too fierce. When he returned this time, he had to properly reorganize the servants in the mansion. So this scripture of yours is what you read from the eminent monk left behind before he left. Li Xian suddenly understood and asked, the scripture written by the eminent monk is of extraordinary value. Where is that scripture now? Li Yi touched his nose and said, once when I was reading in the toilet, I found that the toilet token was gone. I saw that the paper of the scripture was soft, so Li Xian's eyes widened, his face full of disbelief. Looking at Master Tan Yin's appearance, that scripture must be extraordinary. It was very likely that it was written by an eminent monk of the present age. It was incomparably precious and its value was immeasurable. Someone actually used such a treasure to wipe the smile on the old monk's face had already stiffened. His beard could not help but tremble, a hint of redness appeared on his face, and his breathing also began to quicken. As if feeling danger, Li Yi raised his eyebrows and moved a little closer to Li Yi's side. Amit Ba. After a moment the old monk's breathing gradually calmed down. He chanted a Buddhist name and then asked, "I wonder if the young benefactor remembers the contents of that scripture?" "Of course, I used that scripture to learn to read. I have long memorized all the scriptures in it." Li Yi used his own experience to verify that the saying that monks were tranquil and emotionless was a lie. This old monk was obviously a person of the eminent monk level. Just now even his eyes were red. If he said that he did not remember the scripture in the scripture again, 18 monks with sticks all over their bodies would jump out at the next moment. "That scripture is very important to my Buddhist sect. This old monk has a presumptuous request. Young benefactor, could you make a copy of those scriptures? In the future my Buddhist sect will definitely repay you generously. It is also a virtuous deed and will be blessed by Buddha." All the wrinkles on the old monk's face were revealed, and his turbid eyes were full of smiles. He looked even more like an enlightened eminent monk. "It's nothing. Master, you are exaggerating." Li Yi smiled, equally extraordinary. With just a few words, the tense atmosphere from before finally disappeared and became incomparably harmonious. Copying scriptures was not something that could be completed in a short time. It would take a few days. Of course, Li Yi would not stay in Cold Mountain Temple forever. He made an appointment with the old monk 7 days later. Cold Mountain Temple would send someone down the mountain to retrieve the scripture that Li Yi had copied. A servant from the Li family came to report that old mistress and the others had already left the mountain. The old monk personally sent them out of the temple, which immediately attracted countless people's amazement. They were wondering who those people were and why Master Sandalwood would personally send them off. After all, the last time His Royal Highness Prince of Wei came, he did not receive such treatment. Along the way, Mississippi Lu's expression was not quite right. When she was about to get on the carriage, she looked back at the old monk. "Master, do you know the 1,000-leaf palm of great compassion?" The old monk was stunned, then shook his head. "What about Arhat fist?" The old monk shook his head again. "Vajra palm? Yijin Jing? He doesn't even know the 72 ultimate skills. What kind of master is he?" Mississippi Lu curled her lips and mumbled before getting into the carriage. Chapter 317. It's the Cold Mountain Temple, a small temple. It's normal that they don't know the 72 ultimate arts. You can't expect any monk to be as powerful as the Dharma Hall of the Shaolin Temple. If there's a chance next time, I'll bring you to the Shaolin Temple. Inside the carriage, Li Yi was comforting Mississippi Lu, who didn't know the 72 ultimate arts of Shaolin. Looking at her disappointed expression, Li Yi suspected that accompanying the old madam was just an excuse, and that she wanted to see the legendary Shaolin Kung Fu. One had to know that in the Wuxia stories he had told her, every monk was an expert who looked down on the martial arts world. Fortunately, the old monk really didn't know those Kung Fu. Otherwise, if the two of them were to fight, the Cold Mountain Temple would be torn down. Li Yi looked at her and advised, "Don't ask the master such questions in the future. A monk should keep a low profile. Even if he really knew these Kung Fu, he wouldn't say it out loud." Looking at Mississippi Lu nodding as if she understood his words, Li Yi felt relieved. It seemed that he had misunderstood her. Although Rui had a bad temper, she was not as stubborn as he thought. "Well, since he doesn't want to admit it, I'll just test him next time," Mississippi Lu said as she looked out of the window. Li Yi decided to take back his thoughts. Suddenly he seemed to realize something. He turned to look at her and asked, "You don't know? I really don't know the 1,000-leaf palm of mercy. And the Vajra palm, I've never heard of it. There are countless scriptures in the library. Which one is the muscle bone strengthening scripture?" In the Cold Mountain Temple, the old monk looked at his disciples who had bruises all over their faces and asked, "What happened? Why are you all in such a sorry state? Was there a fight in the temple?" A young monk hugged his arms and shed 2 lines of aggrieved tears. He choked and said, "There was a female benefactor just now." Li Yi sighed and said, "Rui, it's better if you don't go to the Cold Mountain Temple anymore. Their 18 bronze men formation and Vajra demon subduing formation are very powerful. Even a grandmaster wouldn't be able to escape easily once they're trapped. Especially the 18 bronze men, they hold iron rods in their hands and their bodies emit golden light." Mississippi Lu's eyes were full of fighting spirit. "Is that so? I'd like to see if it's really as powerful as you say it is." The carriage drove into the city gate. Mississippi Lou didn't plan to take the carriage back to the Lee family. She planned to walk back slowly and experience the local customs in the capital. Lee did not intend to accompany her, but for the safety of the people in the capital, he got off the carriage. He dismissed the servants who wanted to stay and let them go back with the little fatty. A beautiful young lady walked in front. When she passed by a stall or a shop, she would go in and take a look. Two handsome young masters followed behind her. A little further away, a few guards lagged far behind. They were not as nervous as they used to be. With Mississippi Lou around, nothing would happen to His Royal Highness. If even she couldn't do it, it would be useless for them to go up. Mississippi Lou had just bought a piece of fashionable cloth. When she saw another shop with more luxurious decorations, she immediately handed the cloth to Li Yi and walked in. Li Xian's bodyguard tactfully walked over and took on the role of a porter. Do you know, I found a kind of sturdy and light cloth in the capital. It's perfect for making kites. The capital is really not something Qing and Prefecture can compare to. There are many good things here. I searched everywhere in Qing and Prefecture, but I couldn't find a suitable cloth. As Li Xian walked, he said, I've tried it before. The kites made from this kind of cloth can stay in the air for a longer period of time. Yesterday, a guard ran down a steep slope and actually flew more than 10 zhang in the air. However, he didn't fly too high. The highest he flew was about 2 zhang above the ground. Li Xian wasn't satisfied with growing wings on his mind. He wanted to plant wings on the guards of the prince's mansion. Fortunately, the guards of the prince's mansion were all experts. Even if they fell from a height of 3 to 2 feet, they would be fine. Otherwise, Prince Ning Mansion would definitely become the largest sanatorium for the disabled in the Jing Kingdom. According to his current knowledge, to be able to do this was already not bad. At the very least, he was in the right direction. He wasn't like that fellow who tied a rocket launcher to a chair and pulled 2 kites in his hands and wanted to fly into the sky. Also, I'm also making the hot air balloon that you mentioned last time. But there's a big problem. The cloth isn't fireproof and it's very likely to burn. There's also no suitable fuel. Even if I fly, I won't be able to last long. Under the inspiration of Li Yi, Li Xian's thinking had already far surpassed the people of this era. After such a long time, he finally understood that there was only one person in this world who could discuss these things with him. Geniuses were all lonely. Ordinary people couldn't understand the pain of not being able to find a confidant in the entire world. These words had been bottled up in his mind for a long time. Finally, he found someone who was worth talking to and who could understand him. From the beginning, his mouth hadn't closed. The direction is right. The material and fuel for the hot air balloon is indeed the biggest problem. There's something called tung oil. It's very light and heat resistant. I can try to apply it on the cloth. As for the fuel, there's also something called fierce kerosene. Maybe I can give it a try. Li Yi had discovered a long time ago that Mississippi Lou had no immunity to good-looking cloth. She obviously didn't know how to sew clothes, but every time she went out on the street she would buy some cloth. Last time, 2 pieces of cloth were bitten by rats. In a fit of anger, she chased the rats out of their holes and tore them into pieces. Accompanying a woman shopping was a very tiring thing. Mississippi Lou entered the cloth shop and couldn't come out for a while. Li Yi casually sat down at a noodle stall next to the cloth shop and continued to complete his plan to cultivate a great scientist. Guest, would you like to eat noodles? A shy voice came from the opposite side. Li Yi raised his head and saw a skinny girl around 10 years old looking at them. The next moment, the little girl was pulled to the back by a woman with a white scarf wrapped around her head. The woman said with a smile, "Children don't know anything. Please rest as much as you want." The 2 young masters in front of them had extraordinary temperaments. The one on the left could probably buy the whole noodle stall with just 1 piece of clothing. How could such nobles eat noodles here? Li Yi saw the little girl hiding behind the woman and looking at them with a wronged expression. He smiled and said, "A bowl of noodles? Put more chopped green onions, no coriander." Having lived 2 lives, he didn't have the habit of not eating on the street. A few months ago, he and Xiao Huan ate a bowl of vegetarian noodles on the street of Qing and Prefecture. It was better than any delicacy. Today he had eaten something in the morning. He was already hungry. Just thinking of the steaming hot sour noodle soup made his appetite increase. The woman was stunned for a moment, then immediately nodded and said, "Yes, please wait a moment. The noodles will be served soon." The skinny little girl washed a rough porcelain bowl 5 or 6 times before putting it on the table. The woman cooked a bowl of noodles. The noodles were 30% more than usual. She seasoned it, sprinkled a handful of chopped green onions and immediately brought it over. "Guest, the noodles are ready." It was just a bowl of wheat flour in front of him. There wasn't even a single green vegetable, but it smelled extraordinarily fragrant. Li looked at the woman in surprise. The sauce she had just put in was definitely not ordinary. Li Xian smelled the fragrance and couldn't help swallowing a mouthful of saliva. He hesitated for a moment, then raised his head and said, "Give me a bowl too." A guard came forward and was about to say something when Li Xian waved his hand. He had no choice but to leave. A moment later, at the noodle stall on the side of the street, two noblemen with extraordinary temperaments were eating noodles, which became a different kind of scenery on the street. Lu Rui walked out of the cloth shop with a roll of cloth in his arms and saw such a scene. Chapter 318. Lu Rui had used half a year to prove one thing. Anything that Li Yi liked to eat would definitely taste good. Therefore, after a while, there was another beautiful young lady sitting at the noodle stall eating noodles on the side of the street, in addition to the two noble young masters with extraordinary bearing. The lady stood in the stall, rubbing her hands nervously. The stall had always served uncouth people. Even if they were slightly noble, they wouldn't eat noodles here. She couldn't handle the scene in front of her. The skinny little girl had a faint smile on her face, revealing two cute canine teeth. If she wasn't too skinny and didn't have much flesh on her face, she would also be a beautiful little girl. "Madam, give me another bowl." Li put down the bowl. He had even finished the soup, but he still felt like he hadn't had enough. Even he himself was curious why he had such a special liking for the noodles of this noodle stall. He felt a sense of familiarity as if he had eaten it a long time ago and more than once. Ah! It was rare for a distinguished guest to like to eat her family's noodles. The lady responded, and the smile on her face grew wider. She hurried to prepare the noodles. Li Xian cast a disdainful look at Li Yi's behavior. He had received the etiquette of the royal family since he was young. He only ate until he was 70% full. No matter how much he liked the food, he wouldn't eat a second bowl. He wiped his mouth, pushed the empty bowl to the side and said, "Madam, cook another bowl. I want more noodles." Just now, he clearly saw that the noodles in Li Yi's bowl were at least 20% more than his. How could a dignified heir lose to him in this kind of thing? When he ate the second bowl of noodles, Li Yi slowed down. After all, although the bowl was a little small, the amount was not little. He looked up at the lady and asked, "The sauce that Madam just put in should be a secret recipe passed down in your family, right?" Li Yi had eaten a lot of noodles in his 2 lives, so he was quite knowledgeable about it. The noodles could only be considered average, but the soup was really delicious. It was not inferior to the famous old restaurants in his previous life. In the past, those elegant young masters would never look her in the eye when they passed by. The woman had never met such a kind noble before. She smiled and nodded, saying, "Noble's guess is correct. This sauce has been passed down from our ancestors for several decades. Looks like it's an old shop." Li Yi smiled and said, "The taste of this noodles is inexplicably familiar. I feel like I've eaten it somewhere before." "You're not from the capital, are you?" the woman asked. Li Yi shook his head and said, "Don't call me nobleman anymore. I'm really not from Beijing." The young master must have remembered wrongly. Our ancestors were all in the capital, and this secret recipe has never been shown to anyone. It's impossible for young master to have eaten it anywhere else. The nervousness in the woman's heart had almost disappeared. When talking about the secret recipe, she couldn't help but say a few more words. Li Yi didn't continue the question. Perhaps he really had eaten similar noodles before, but it was in another world. After all, there was already a bowl of noodles at the bottom. This time he only ate half of the noodles and finished the soup. Li Xian rubbed his bulging stomach and imitated the woman to drink the soup. If this scene was seen by the imperial censor, he would at least reprimand him for losing his royal bearing. The woman began to clean the bowls and chopsticks while the little girl wiped the tables and chairs with a cloth. The weather was still cold after the Lantern Festival, but her forehead was covered in a fine layer of sweat. Bang! A muffled sound suddenly came from the side. A large foot immediately appeared on the table that the little girl had just wiped. What followed was a strong smell of foot odor. "Lady He, it's time to pay the membership fee." Li Yi covered his nose and looked at the rough man as if he was looking at a gas bomb. Mississippi Lu had the fastest reaction. She had already pinched her nose and moved far away. The big man's foot was placed on the table next to Li Xian, less than a foot away. Li Yi clearly saw his face turn from red to white and then green. Then he suddenly turned his head and covered his mouth to retch. Seeing him so disgusted that tears were about to flow down, Li Yi secretly sighed. He had eaten the noodles just now for nothing. When seeing the big man, the little girl's face turned pale and she quickly ran behind the woman. The woman's face was pale. She looked at the big man and said in a trembling voice, "Master Hu, didn't we just pay this morning? Why, stop talking nonsense." The big man impatiently waved his hand and said, "This is my territory. I can collect whenever I want and however many times I want. If your noodle stall wants to continue operating here, then give me the money." Li looked at this scene in surprise. The security in the capital of the country was actually so bad under the emperor's feet? How could the people collecting protection fees be so brazen? If this was in Qin and prefecture, which ruffian would dare to be so arrogant? They would have been beaten half to death by Lu Yi. Ever since he discovered the dark phenomenon of collecting protection fees in the city, under Li Yi's instigation, Lu Yi had thoroughly reorganized the ruffians and idlers in the city. He invited them to the county office for tea for a few days, and after that, there were no more cases of protection fees. Instead, a group of burly men could often be seen picking up trash on the streets. The hygiene of the city had immediately improved a lot. It was said that the magistrate had specially praised County Magistrate Lu for this and listed him as a role model for other counties to learn from. The woman said with a bitter face, "Master Hu, I really don't have any money. You took all the money this morning. We only did business with a few customers this morning. We really don't have any money. No money, let me see." The burly man called Tiger Lord kicked over the table in front of him and jumped inside. He picked up a worn-out wooden box on the ground. After opening it, he picked out a few copper coins from inside and casually threw the wooden box on the ground. He said, "Damn, it's my bad luck to have met a poor ghost like you." Lu Rui frowned. Just as she was about to walk over, she stopped in her tracks when she saw an officer patrolling the streets not far away. "What are you doing?" Seeing the patrol officer walking over from afar, the man waved his hand and said, "Brother Song, it's nothing. Do what you need to do. I'll treat you to a drink tonight. Don't go overboard." The patrol officer said, waved his hand and turned to leave. Li was dumbfounded. Was this really the capital city? Could the collusion between officials and bandits be more obvious? No wonder the woman did not look happy when she saw the patrol officer walking over. Instead, she turned even paler. It turned out that the officials were in cahoots with the people collecting protection fees. The man took the copper coin, cursed inwardly, and was about to leave. However, someone would not let him leave so quickly. Li Xian's eyes seemed to be spewing fire. He kicked the man away. A long time ago, Li Yi knew that while he looked gentle and weak on the surface, he was actually quite skilled. At that time, when he had forcefully dragged him to Ning Wang Fu, he had no power to resist at all. Who the F***ck? The man was quite powerful. He got up from the ground in a roll and cursed. Before he turned around, he was sent flying again. Li Xian pinched his nose. He did not want to go near that guy anymore. He waved his hand and retreated to Li Yi's side. Most of the time, Li Yi wondered if he had a split personality. When he was serious, he could be elegant and polite, making it impossible for anyone to find fault with him. But when he was hedonistic, he was the standard spoiled brat, swaggering through the streets with a bunch of lackeys. With just a wave of his hand, 2 guards would walk over and trample on the man like a human sandbag. Seeing the elegant young master suddenly become so fierce, the overlord of this generation, Master Hu, could only hug his head and beg for mercy. The woman's mouth was wide open, and she could not come back to her senses for a while. The little girl clutched the corner of her mother's clothes tightly. Tears were still hanging in the corner of her eyes. She stared blankly at the man rolling on the ground and clenched her fists. Chapter 319. Li Xian's face was extremely pale. He held onto the wall with one hand and occasionally retched a few times. Li Yi believed that he wasn't being so cruel to that Tiger Lord, because he wanted to help the weak. When he ate until his stomach was round, the first thing he smelled was the pungent smell. It was already good enough that he didn't vomit out his gallbladder. That bastard, how many months had it been since he washed his feet? "Young master, you can't hit him, you can't hit him." The woman rushed out of the noodle shop with a panicked expression. Li looked at the woman and asked with a frown, "How can there be such ruffians in the capital? Don't the officials care?" "You can't hit him, you really can't hit him." The woman was flustered and hurriedly said, "Young masters, you should leave this place quickly. When the officials come, you won't be able to leave. These ruffians were only robbing some copper coins. How could they compare to the officials? If they fell into the hands of the officials, they would lose their lives." The anger on Li Xian's face was difficult to quell. He coldly said, "I really don't plan on leaving today. I want to see what they can do to me." Because of the special status of the members of the royal family, their every action represented the face of the royal family. Thus, the royal family had very strict restrictions on them. They absolutely couldn't bully the commoners. Otherwise, the censor's impeachment would definitely fly to the emperor's desk like snowflakes. Of course, although they couldn't bully others, they couldn't be bullied by others either. Bullying the kind-hearted members of the royal family would at most be punished. Bullying the royal family wasn't a big crime. At most, they would be beheaded. Seeing that the young master in front of her was determined, the woman's expression became even more anxious. This noble was obviously of extraordinary birth, but how could he be compared to that huge monster? She couldn't drag him down. "You two stop." Two loud shouts came from not far away. Several patrolling bailiffs quickly ran over. Without the crown prince's orders, the two guards wouldn't stop. The fact that the person who offended the crown prince could still scream in pain was simply a humiliation to them. With this thought in mind, the two of them exerted more strength in their hands and feet. "Which thug dares to commit murder in the middle of the street? Stop right now, or don't blame us for being impolite." The leader of the group was the constable with the surname Song, whom they had just met. Before he even walked over, he had already heard the classic sayings of a constable. Clang. The 5 bailiffs drew their swords and surrounded the two of them. "Stop." Li Xin walked over and said calmly. Only then did the 2 guards stop and turn around to look at the bailiffs who had surrounded them. "Who are you?" Constable Song asked. He knew that the person in front of him was the most important person in this group. Li Xian said coldly, "It doesn't matter who I am. What matters is that this bully is doing evil in the street. As an official, why don't you do anything and let him bully this mother and son?" When Constable Song heard this, he felt extremely depressed. This mother Kerr was just another busybody. If Wang Hu dared to do this to anyone else, he would have been arrested and sent to the government office to have his legs broken. However, the he mother and son were not on that list. The higher-ups had already instructed them to turn a blind eye to their affairs. All the ruffians on the street knew that they could come here to withdraw money when they needed it. As long as they didn't go overboard, the government wouldn't do anything to them. "Humph, with which eye did you see them being bullied?" Constable Song also snorted and said, "I only saw the 2 of you committing murder in the middle of the street. It was a very bad influence. Come with us to the government office." At the side, Li finally noticed something different. This group of bailiffs and the group of bullies lying on the ground were obviously targeting the mother and son, and they must have some backing. In a place like the capital, there were countless pairs of eyes watching everything you did. If you saw a young master coming out of a brothel on the street, he would either be the only son of a prime minister or the heir of a duke's family. If Constable Song was so arrogant to everyone, he wouldn't have survived until now. However, this time it was obvious that he had made a mistake. Constable Song didn't think that he had made a mistake. The waters of the capital were very deep. Unlike in other places, where even a small bailiff could do as he pleased in the countryside, in this place where nobility was everywhere and anyone he picked was a relative of the emperor, he naturally had to be careful. Otherwise he might lose his head one day. Therefore, Constable Song was very clear about those people who couldn't be provoked. He even had a small booklet to record their names and pay attention to them on a daily basis. He also knew what they looked like. Of course, this person in front of him wasn't one of them. In fact, there were many people like this who were nosy before. However, when he realized that the county magistrate didn't even give face to a marquis, he knew what kind of backing they had. "I'm the one who got you into trouble?" The woman's face was pale. In the end, there was only bitterness left on her face. In fact, when Master Hu appeared at the noodle stall, many heads popped out from the shops on the street. They secretly cursed in their hearts. They didn't know who this lady from the He family had offended, but all the bullies on the street picked on her and bullied her. It wasn't easy for her to get to where she was after so many years. This time, she might not be able to keep the money she earned from selling the noodle. However, things didn't develop as they usually did. Wang Hu was kicked away by the thin and weak young master. He was punched and kicked like a dead dog. The young master was in big trouble now that the constables were here. In the past, there were also people who wanted to help the lady from the He family, but they all ended up in a miserable state. "I really want to see which way the main gate of the capital county government opens." Li Xian stopped the guard from revealing his identity. He crossed his arms and said with interest, "The constables didn't treat them as ordinary people. After all, they didn't take the county government seriously. They must be people of high status." They might not be able to offend the person who caused trouble for the He family, but they definitely could afford to offend Constable Song. As a result, a strange scene appeared on the street. A group of people walked in the direction of the county government. The two young masters in front were strolling leisurely, talking and laughing. The woman behind them was holding the little girl's hand. Her face was pale. A few constables followed behind as if they were escorting them. It was often said that it was difficult to be an official in the capital city. Those who were officials in the capital city were all outstanding among the country's officials. They were the true pillars of the country. It was not an exaggeration to say that they brought honor to their ancestors. Of course, this did not include the county magistrate of the capital city. Although the county magistrate of the capital city was the county magistrate in name, he was still under the rule of the emperor. His rank was very high, equivalent to or even slightly higher than the magistrate of the other provinces. However, no matter how high his rank was, it couldn't hide the awkward status of the county magistrate of the capital city. The reason was simple. The capital city was the capital of a country. It was where the imperial city was located. There were countless princes and nobles. From the beginning to the end of the street, there were several officials who had a higher rank than the county magistrate. Chen Yu was such a good-for-nothing county magistrate. He was just over 40 years old and had a lot of white hair on his temples. It had been 3 years since he was promoted to the county magistrate of the capital city. At this time, Chen Yu was worried about a case. The young master of the Duke of Zhao Kingdom and the young master of the Duke of Wei fought over a girl in a brothel. The guards of the two families teamed up and tore down the brothel. Now he had to decide which of the two was guilty. How the hell was he supposed to decide? No matter which one it was, he couldn't afford to offend them. The only thing he could do was to smooth things over. As for the brothel, it was the bad luck of the madam. Just as he was feeling vexed, a constable came to report that there was a new case. Chapter 320. What case? Chen Yu asked impatiently. I think it's about the lady from the He family. I'm not sure about the details. Constable Song has brought her back and is waiting outside. All right. You can leave now. I'll be right there. Chen Yu waved his hand and said. The matter between the Duke of Zhao Kingdom and the Duke of Wei Kingdom had not been resolved yet. Now there was another trivial matter that needed to be dealt with. Chen Yu was filled with regret. If he knew that being a county magistrate in the capital city would be like this, he would not have used the power of his family to get this position 3 years ago. It would have been better to be a free magistrate in another state. There was no trifling matter at the foot of the emperor. Any ordinary case in the capital city could reach the ears of the emperor. If it was not handled well, the magistrate might be sent back to his hometown. It's that lady with the surname He again? Chen Yu frowned. He stood up and walked out. Although he was the county magistrate of the capital city, he was also a branch of the Chen family. If it was not for the support of the House of Duke, he would not be where he was today. Of course, he had to pay attention to the things that they asked him to do. Chen Yu had heard about what happened 20 years ago. There was a noble family that had a marriage alliance with the House of Duke. Before the wedding, the eldest son of the family eloped with a commoner girl. This caused the House of Duke to lose face and became the laughing stock of the wealthy families in the capital city. The lady from the Chen family never married. Until now, she was still living in the House of Duke. Now that the High Duke's public house was like the sun in the sky, the other noble family that was once prominent was gradually declining, and the woman's family was also affected. Due to certain reasons, the High Duke's public house could not be too ruthless, but they would not let them off easily either. Chen Yu was ordered by the House of Duke to take care of the He family for the past 3 years. The hall of the county government was actually a very dignified place. There was a huge horizontal board hanging in the center of the hall with the words, Mirror of Eminence hangs high. 2 rows of bailiffs stood solemnly on both sides of the hall with water and fire sticks in their hands. As soon as the county magistrate hit the gavel, they would keep hitting the ground with the sticks and say mighty, to directly attack the psychological defense of the criminal. Li Yi was already used to all of this, so he wasn't affected in the slightest. Needless to say, Li Xian, even the second young miss of the Lu family, was sizing up the decorations here as she commented on them. The capital was indeed the capital. The main hall of the county yamen exuded an atmosphere of grandeur, much grander than the Anshi county yamen. As for the woman and the little girl, they weren't so calm. The woman's face was pale, but she could barely maintain her composure. The little girl tugged at the corner of her mother's clothes, and her big bright eyes were filled with panic. "Little sister, what's your name?" Li walked to her side, squatted down and said with a smile. "These bastards, if such a little girl is scared, it will probably leave a psychological shadow for the rest of her life." The little girl bit her lips. After a long time she said softly, "Duanwu." "Duanwu? What a nice name. You treated me to noodles just now. Now I'll treat you to something, okay?" Li said, looking at her. The little girl shook her head, looked at him and said timidly, "To eat noodles you have to pay for it." "Duanwu, what are you talking about?" The woman pulled her behind her and hurriedly said to Li, "Young master, don't listen to her." Hearing this, Li was stunned and then he laughed. He turned to look at Li Xian and asked, "Do you have money with you? You forgot to pay for the noodles just now." Of course, Li Xian wouldn't bring money with him. A guard who was perceptive handed him an ingot in time. Mother change. As if influenced by Li Yi, the little girl wasn't as scared as before. She took the ingot and handed it to her mother. She had only seen broken silver before, and she knew that whenever a customer paid with such things, her mother would always get back a lot of copper coins. "You're so rude, return the money." When the woman scolded the little girl with a straight face, Li Yi waved his hand and took out a paper bag from his chest. After opening it, he placed it in front of the little girl and said, "Can I treat you to something now?" Inside the paper bag was the candied plums that the little fatty had given him. In exchange, Li Yi had to hide the fact that he was fighting outside. As for the bruises on his face, the official explanation was that he fell down. Of course, this fall had to be very skillful. Ordinary people wouldn't be able to fall like this without 8 to 10 years of martial arts. The little fatty might be gifted, it just depended on whether his parents believed it or not. It had to be said that the little fatty was quite accomplished in the art of eating. The candied plums that he gave to Li Yi were the best of the best. Smelling the fragrance of the candied plums, the little girl swallowed a mouthful of saliva, but she didn't immediately reach out her hand. She looked up at him and a trace of desire flashed in her eyes. She asked, "Do I need money?" "This is Big Brother's treat. It's free," Li Yi said with a smile. "Thank you, Big Brother." The little girl finally reached out her hand and only took one piece. She split it in half and handed the extra half to the woman. She turned back to look at Li Yi and said, "Next time I'll treat Big Brother to noodles." "It's free." The surrounding bailiffs were all dumbfounded. They had never seen such an arrogant person in court. Not to mention that he was chatting and laughing, he was even eating now. Did he even put them in his eyes? But what was the little girl eating? It smelled so good and they really wanted to try it. They secretly swallowed a mouthful of saliva, but none of the bailiffs dared to do so. Those who dared to be so presumptuous in court were either crazy or really had something to rely on. It was obviously not the former who could bring guards with him. They just needed to pretend that they didn't see it. It was better to leave the trouble to the county magistrate. Li Xian was surprised to see this. Finally, he couldn't help but pull Li Yi aside and asked, "Did you know this little girl before?" "It's my first time seeing her." Li Yi shook his head. Li Xian looked even more puzzled. It was the first time he saw Li Yi being so friendly to a stranger. He asked suspiciously, "Don't tell me that you have feelings for this little girl? Get lost." Li Yi spat out a word unceremoniously. This guy's mind was too dirty. She was just a child. His good impression of this little girl came entirely from an inexplicable sense of intimacy. Perhaps seeing her appearance had triggered some memories. After all, when he was young he had also suffered a lot. For the time being he would just take it that she was more to his liking. Li Xian looked at the little girl curiously again. He took out a piece of candied fruit from the paper bag in Li Yi's hand. Just as he threw it into his mouth, an angry rebuke came from the front. "How dare you? The court is not a restaurant. Who are you? How dare you be presumptuous in court?" Seeing the middle-aged man in official robes walk out from the back of the hall, Li Xian slowly swallowed the candied fruit and wiped his mouth. Only then did he raise his head to look at the man and say, "Today I saw an evil tyrant bullying the good on the street, yet the officials didn't care and even helped the tyrant commit his crimes. I read the books of the sages. Although I'm a commoner, I still have a sense of righteousness. I would like to ask Lord Magistrate, in the capital city, under the feet of the Son of Heaven, is there still law?" "Books of sages? Commoners?" Li Yi was stunned. He looked at Li Xian and then at the middle-aged official in the court. He was speechless for a moment. "Did the sages teach you to be presumptuous in court?" Qin Yu's eyes flashed. He slammed the gavel and said loudly. Chapter 321. Qin Yu was the magistrate of the capital city, so he naturally knew who he couldn't provoke. He also knew those nobles, especially those who didn't have to give face to Duke Chen's mansion. They claimed to be commoners, and looked unfamiliar, but they claimed to be scholars. Their faces were full of righteousness, as if they were seeking justice for the people. Chen Yu had been an official for many years and had seen too many scholars like this. The current emperor attached great importance to the imperial examinations and recruited scholars from all over the world. It could be said that he had paved a broad road for scholars in the Jing kingdom. Countless scholars from poor families, after 10 years of hard work, were entrusted with important tasks once they passed the examinations. In their lifetime, there were countless who became part of the imperial court. These young people who read the books of sages boasted that they were righteous and fearless. Of course, they were also a group of people who liked to meddle in other people's business. Disrespecting the court should have been punished with flogging as a warning to others. Seeing that you are scholars, I will forgive you this once. Chen Yu sat on the main seat and said calmly. Scholars liked to meddle in other people's business and were the most difficult to deal with. One or two of them wouldn't be a problem, but if they gathered together and blocked the county yamen, regardless of whether they had a reason or not, it would be enough to make him, the magistrate of the capital city, suffer. Hearing the words of the official in the court, the woman immediately pulled the little girl to kneel. Scholars didn't have to kneel in the court, but if they didn't understand etiquette, they would be punished. Constable Song, what happened? Tell me in detail, Chen Yu said again. Chen Yu spoke up once more. No matter how biased he was in secret, he still had to act like he was going by the book. My lord, this subordinate was patrolling the streets as usual. When we discovered that there were people fighting on the side of the street, we immediately went forward to stop them. Who would have thought that the culprit would not listen to our advice and had no regard for the law? Constable Song had a righteous expression and a dutiful expression on his face. He pointed at Li Xian's 2 bodyguards and then pointed at the battered man that was carried back by the 2 bailiffs. He said, "These are the 2 thugs and the victim." Nonsense. It's obvious that this evil man robbed the mother and daughter of their money. As officials, you didn't do anything about it. It's obvious that you're colluding with him. You're in cahoots with him? Li Xian looked up at the man in the hall and asked, "Are all the people in the county government this kind of people who don't care about the lives of the people?" Seeing Li Xian's righteousness as if he really was a scholar who was pleading for the people, Li Yi felt that if there was a Best Actor award in this world, there would definitely be a spot for him. He didn't use his identity as a prince, but pretended that he didn't have any background. There must be something wrong with this abnormal situation. No matter how he looked at it, the forehead of the official in the court was faintly black, and he would be in trouble soon. How dare you? Chen Yu slammed the gavel and said angrily. He stared at the woman in the audience with bright eyes and asked, "Madam He, tell me, did someone want to rob you and your daughter of their money?" The woman turned her head and looked at Li Xian with deep regret in her eyes. She gritted her teeth and said, "No." She knew that if she told the truth, it would end up harming the 2 young masters. Wasn't twisting the truth the best thing these officials did? Chen Yu walked to the audience and looked at Li Xian. He said, "Even she denied it. What else do you have to say?" Li Xian looked at the woman with a thoughtful expression. "Man, arrest these 2 lawless villains who are fighting in the street and give them 50 strokes of the cane." Chen Yu waved his hand and looked at Li Xian. He said again, "Keep your servants in check in the future. If it happens again, I won't let it go easily." "You dog official, you're really in cahoots with these guys," Rui said coldly. If Li Yi hadn't stopped him, he would have pulled out his sword and cut off the dog official's head. Li Yi looked bitter. He decided not to tell Mississippi Lu those martial arts stories anymore. She didn't learn the good ones but always learned those messy things. Killing dog officials and eliminating evil officials were the work of the Condor hero. What did it have to do with her, the deadly fairy? Chen Yu's face was a little pale. He had been an official for many years and had never been called a dog official. Before he could lose his temper, a jade waist token appeared in front of him. The supervisory censor of Jianghu province. Chen Yu was shocked. He looked at the jade token carefully, and his face suddenly changed. The supervision system of the Jing kingdom was mostly inherited from the previous dynasty. The supervisory censor was in charge of supervising the officials, patrolling the counties and correcting the prisons. Although they were not high-ranking officials, they had a wide range of authority. Princesses, princes, nobles and officials were all afraid of these censors. Even if Lord Qin did something wrong, these censors could still not give him face, let alone a small capital magistrate. However, when did the supervisory censor of Jianghu province change and he was such a young man? The token that represented his identity could not be fake. Chen Yu's face changed and he said with a smile, "I didn't know you were coming, supervisor. I didn't go out to greet you. Say no more." Li Xian waved his hand impatiently and said, "I'll report what I've seen and heard today to His Majesty." "Take care, Your Excellency." The supervisory censor had the right to meet the emperor directly. Chen Yu felt his vision go black and his body swayed a few times. Immediately, a runner came over and supported him in time. Since he was the supervisor, why didn't he say so earlier? He had obviously dug a big hole for him to jump into. If Chen Yu knew what the entrapment law enforcement was, he would not have been so careless. Unfortunately, it was all too late now. Seeing that the few people had left the hall, Chen Yu forced himself to stand up straight and said hurriedly, "Prepare the carriage. We're going to Lord Chen's mansion." "How did you become the supervisor?" Li Yi asked Li Xian in surprise outside the county government. "It's just a convenient identity. The capital is not like Qing'an Mansion. With this token, it will be much easier to get things done," Li Xian said. Li Yi looked at him enviously. He had to admit that His Majesty treated him very well. The emperor had even thought of this. Although the supervisory censor was a low-ranking official, he was in charge of a lot of things. He could even manage the affairs of the royal family. The emperor treated him like his own son. No, even the emperor's own son did not have such preferential treatment. "Don't worry. Since I've come across this matter, I will definitely get to the bottom of it." Li Xian turned around and said to the mother and daughter, Thank you, Your Excellency." The situation had turned around so quickly that the woman had not yet recovered from the shock. Hearing Li Xian's words, she hurriedly bowed and said. Although she did not know who this excellency was, a glimmer of hope was ignited in her heart when he saw that even the county magistrate did not give face to him. Now that things had developed to this point, it was clear that the mother and daughter were no longer involved. Perhaps it was because he had been disgusted earlier, but Li Xian was obviously very serious about this matter. It was better for the county magistrate to clean up his mess. Otherwise he would not be able to escape this time. Li Yi had rejected the invitation to visit his late son's mansion. There was still a matter at home that had not been taken care of. The chubby boy thought that his plan was flawless and wanted to use the excuse of falling to get away. At this time, no one knew what kind of torture he was suffering. Li Yi also had a part in this matter, so it was only right for him to share some of the burden. As expected, not long after he stepped into the Li mansion, the chubby boy's howl came from one of the halls. Chapter 322. I really fell down on the mountain. Big brother can be my witness. If you don't believe me, you can ask Big brother. The little fatty defended himself loudly. In his opinion, a bag of 10 Lixiang candied plums was enough to bribe anyone. I heard that you were beaten up by the young master of the Chen family until you were begging for mercy? A beautiful woman suddenly looked at him and asked. Nonsense, I was the one who beat them up. Hearing what his aunt said, the little fatty's face turned red as if he had been insulted. What, you beat up the young master of Duke Chen's family? Another woman's expression changed as she exclaimed. There were quite a few people in the hall. Other than the old madam, Li Mingze and his wife, Li Mingyuan and his wife were all present. The little fatty's mother was rubbing medicine for him with a heartache. The one who exclaimed just now was Li Mingze's wife, Madame Fong. This child, how can you be so good at causing trouble? Is the Qin family something we can provoke? Madame Fong said angrily. The Qin family and the Li family were not on good terms. The Qin family was powerful and the Li family had always avoided conflict with them. The young master of the Qin family was very favored by the Qin family. If they were to provoke the Qin family because of this, it was hard to say what they would do to the Li family. Sister-in-law, what are you saying? Although Inkai is a bit greedy, he would never take the initiative to bully others. However, the Qin family has always been targeting our Li family. Are they the only ones allowed to bully us while our child can't even fight back? Although Li Mingyuan's wife, Madame Lu, usually kept a low profile like her husband, she naturally wouldn't remain silent when it came to her child. Madame Fong said unhappily, Look, now you're blaming me. The Qin family and the Li family have been friends for generations. Why did it become like this today? Isn't it because... Stop. Li Mingze was the master of the Li family. After he spoke, no one else spoke. Li Wen, how did Inkai and the young master of Duke Chen's family get into conflict? Tell me honestly. Li Mingze pointed at a servant behind the little fatty. The servant glanced at the little fatty and gave him an apologetic look. He didn't dare to disobey the family head's orders, so he could only tell the whole story in full detail. After listening to the cause of the matter, Li Mingzi said, although genius was in the right in this matter, he still fought with someone. Prepare a generous gift and send it to the Chen family. As the head of the family, of course, he couldn't let his emotions affect his decisions. The Chen family was like the sun in the sky, still as glorious as ever. The Li family was supported by him alone. If he could avoid offending the Chen family, it would be better not to offend them. There's no need. Although the Li family has declined, we are not a family that can be easily bullied by others. Our Li family has let them down for what happened back then. However, we have already repaid what should be repaid after all these years. The only person we owe is that child from the Chen family. At this time, the old woman who had been silent all this while stood up and said, this matter was the Chen family who broke the rules first. Inkai didn't do anything wrong, neither did he. This is a matter between children. If the Chen family still cares about their reputation, they won't pursue it. As for your friend, it's his first time in the capital, why would he have a friend here? I met him in Qing Prefecture. It was a coincidence that I bumped into him in the capital this time. Li walked in from outside and explained, Ir and Rui are back. The old mistress smiled and said, if it wasn't for Ir today, Inkai would have been at a disadvantage. We are all family, so we should help each other. The old mistress had lived for a lifetime. From the glory days of the Li family until now, she had seen too many things. She knew the root of a family's longevity. She was actually very satisfied with Li Yi's actions today. Yes. Big brother's kung fu is amazing. You must teach me. The next time I see Qin Xiaotian, I can send him flying with one kick. Seeing Li Yi, the chubby boy was obviously in high spirits. He ran over excitedly and said. The scene he saw on the mountain was still deeply engraved in his mind. Hiss. Before he could finish, he sucked in a breath of cold air in pain. Lady Yun pulled his ear and dragged him back. Lady Feng laughed coldly and said in a strange tone, Inkai didn't lose out, but we have offended the Chen family again. That year, Big Brother abandoned the third daughter of the Chen family and ran away, causing the two families to become enemies. Now, Big Brother's family and the Chen family probably have a feud for generations. Knowing that she had always held a grudge against Big Brother's family, Li Mingzi frowned slightly. In front of so many people, he couldn't reprimand her. He turned to look at Li Yi and said, in a few days I will think of a way to move around and see if I can transfer you to the capital. However, the capital is not like Qing Prefecture. In the future, remember not to be so impulsive. Li Yi could feel that although this second aunt seemed to be dissatisfied with him, he really didn't take it to heart. After all, it wasn't like he hadn't seen second aunt before. He had long been immune to her. However, they had only known each other for a day, but this dignified man in front of him was so protective of him. He really was like an elder in the family, which made him feel slightly touched. As for the transfer, Li didn't say much. Although he was only a small county lieutenant, no one could transfer this position unless the emperor said so. Li Yi felt that it was good to be an idle county lieutenant in Qing Prefecture. He could train a few capable subordinates and live a perfect life with only a salary and no work. Wasn't it much easier than working hard in the capital? It would be best if His Majesty had long forgotten about him. This ideal would become reality. Thinking about it, the emperor was very busy. He had to deal with thousands of affairs in the day and thousands of concubines at night. Anyway, he was very busy during the day and night. He was just a small character, so he probably wouldn't care about him. Oh right, it's best to let your friend in the capital leave the capital as soon as possible. If he is found by Duke Qin, I'm afraid it will be very troublesome. Li Mingzi reminded again. In his view, Li Yi's friend naturally wouldn't be someone powerful. He was far from being able to compete with Duke Qin. Li Yi nodded, but he didn't take this matter to heart. Whether Li Xian left the capital was naturally not something he could control. It would be fine if they didn't investigate. If Duke Qin found out about him, who knew who would be in trouble? Investigate, we must find out who they are. In Duke Qin's mansion, a few guards with broken legs were lying in rows outside, wailing in pain. A beautiful woman pointed at the few people in the room and said loudly. She looked at the young boy in her arms with a swollen face and tears in his eyes. She gritted her teeth and said, the Li family, it's the Li family again. 20 years ago they made our Chen family lose face. Today they treat my son like this. I will not let you go. Where is Qin Yu? Let him handle this matter. He will go to the Li family to seek justice for my son. Beside her, a middle-aged man looked at the guards wailing outside the door. His face was also gloomy. Li Qing, other than the Li family, have you found out the identities of the others? The middle-aged man looked at Qin Liqing, who was standing there with his head lowered, and asked calmly. Hearing this, Qin Liqing trembled and immediately said, I only know that there is a person named Li Yi from Qing'an province. I don't know what relationship he has with the Li family. As for the person who ordered the guards to break one of their legs, I haven't found him yet. The middle-aged man's frown deepened. At this moment, someone walked in quickly and whispered a few words in Qin Liqing's ear. Hearing this, Qin Liqing immediately walked in front of the middle-aged man and said again, I've found out. The young man named Li Yi is the eldest grandson of the Li family who just returned. He is the son of the eldest son Li Minghan who left the Li family 20 years ago. A few days ago the Li family had been sending people to search for him. He only arrived in the capital yesterday. Just as Qin Liqing finished speaking, a strange sound came from behind the screen in the hall. The face of the woman behind the screen was pale. She clenched her fists so tightly that her nails dug into her palms. Blood dripped down her palms, but she didn't notice. Chapter 323. What? You're saying Li Minghan is back? Hearing Qin Liqing's words, the middle-aged man's eyes flashed and his expression darkened. Yes, I heard this from a servant of the Li family. It shouldn't be wrong, Qin Liqing said apprehensively as he looked up at the middle-aged man. Seeing the expression on his uncle's face, he knew that the rumors about the grudge between the Qin and Li family 20 years ago were probably true. The gorgeous woman raised her head and said fiercely, Li Minghan and that bitch still dare to come back. Not just us but the Li family probably can't tolerate them anymore. Will Li Mingzi return the position of family head to him? Even if he's willing, the Li family won't be willing, right? Li Minghan left all those years ago and delayed my little sister for 20 years. Now that he's back, let's settle old and new debts together. The middle-aged man said gloomily. When he said that name, there was an unconcealable disgust on his face. Don't tell my little sister about this for now. Let Qin go directly to the Li family to arrest them. There's evidence and no one else can say anything. When the middle-aged man looked at the guard with a broken leg, his eyes suddenly flashed with a cold light. If one of these people had died from their injuries, things would have been much easier to deal with. Although the Li family had declined, they were once a prominent family that couldn't be underestimated. Even if the Qin family wanted to target them, they couldn't do so unscrupulously and would meet with great resistance. If not for this, the Li family would have been pushed out of the capital long ago. Qin can't even protect himself now. A cold snort sounded from the door. Another middle-aged man with a dignified expression walked in. Behind him was the pale-faced Qin. Qin Guogong was already old and he was more of a deterrent in the Qin family. The person in charge of the daily affairs of the Qin family was the current Qin Guogong's eldest son, Qin Qing. How is this possible? Qin is doing a good job as the Qin family's magistrate. Why would Big Brother say this? Could it be that someone is targeting the Qin family? Qin Chong said in shock. Losing a capital order was nothing to the Qin family, but knowing that Qin was a member of the Qin family, they still wanted to make a move on him. The meaning behind this was not ordinary. I heard that little Tian and the rest had a conflict with someone outside? Qin Qing didn't answer but asked a question instead. Big Brother, you have to seek justice for little Tian. The beautiful woman wiped her tears and said, Look at how little Tian and the others were beaten by the Li family. Also, my Qin family's guards all had one of their legs broken. This is not beating them but slapping our Qin family's face. I'm afraid it's not just the Li family, right? Qin Qing asked again. The woman said with a face full of resentment, Yes, if they didn't have an accomplice, we wouldn't have suffered such a big loss. That person didn't put our Qin Guogong public house in his eyes at all. I've already sent people to investigate. I won't let him go so easily. Qin Qing sneered and said, Of course they wouldn't put our Qin family in their eyes. His Majesty's body is unwell, and the princes and princesses are all praying for His Majesty. Ning Wang's Shizi and Shizi Fei are also in Jing City. Today they went to Cold Mountain Temple and were offended by this group of blind dogs. Tell me, who would you not easily let off? What they are? How is this possible? The beautiful woman's face suddenly turned pale when she heard this. She said in disbelief. Could it be that those servants whose legs were broken had offended Prince Ning and his wife today? Qin Qing glanced at them and said, I've told you long ago that we will get back at the Li family for my little sister's grievances. There's no need to cause trouble for the He family. Yet for this small matter, you've dragged Qinyu into it as well. Bending the law for personal gain to the supervisor of Jianghu province, I'm afraid Qinyu's position in the capital has come to an end. Everything that the Qin family has done for him over the past few years has gone down the drain. A bitter smile appeared on Qinyu's face. With the current situation, he couldn't intervene. Qinyu has been in office for 3 years and hasn't made any major mistakes. He won't lose his position because of this matter, right? Qin Chong hesitated and said, moreover, the Qin family has influence in the imperial censor. Why don't we send someone to the supervisor of the imperial censors? We should. Qin Qing looked at him and asked, His Majesty just appointed Prince Ning as the supervisor of Jianghu province 2 days ago. This morning he was offended by that group of servants. Just now you were still thinking about how to not let him go. How do you think we should do that? This. Qin Chong was stumped for words. Although the Qin family was one of the top nobles in the capital, all of this was given by the imperial family. If they were to clash with the imperial family, they wouldn't end up well. If it was an ordinary clash, it wouldn't be a big deal. After all, this wasn't Prince Ning's territory. In terms of strength, the Qin family was stronger. However, the crown prince and his wife were praying for His Majesty. If this matter was blown out of proportion, it wouldn't just be a conflict with the crown prince. Let's drop this matter for now. Send someone to prepare a generous gift and personally deliver it to the crown prince's residence. Tell them that it was the evil servants of the family who offended His Highness. Apologize to them carefully. As for Qinyu's matter, don't mention it again. The only thing the Qin family could do now was to lower their stance as much as possible. As for Qinyu's fate, it would depend on how the crown prince wanted to deal with it. As for the Li family, they didn't know what kind of relationship they had with the crown prince's residence. The power structure in the capital was very complicated. If a single move was made, it would affect everything. Qin Qing said a few words in a low voice and said, for the time being, keep the matter of Li Mingan's return to the capital a secret from third sister. Tell them to watch their mouths. If even the slightest bit of information is leaked, they will not be let off lightly. When Qin Qing said this sentence, a figure had already retreated from behind the screen. When she passed through the courtyard of the back hall, there were already 2 streaks of tears on the woman's face. She was still mumbling to herself, he's back, he's finally back. The old mistress went to the Cold Mountain Temple today to pay a visit to an eminent monk with profound dharma. However, it seemed that she didn't see the Ruidu. She didn't see the master and returned in disappointment. She didn't expect the old monk to be a famous person. Li didn't know whether or not his dharma was profound, but he liked to give empty promises. He promised to copy the scriptures, but all he got was a promise of, I will repay you generously in the future. It was too insincere. Li felt it was a pity that the old monk wasn't in Qing'an prefecture. Otherwise, he could have given him a chance to repay him generously. The Ruidu that Master Tan Yin had consecrated, why couldn't he sell it for 10 times the price? Now he could only wait until the branch of Rui workshop opened in the capital and then invite him to cut the ribbon to repay the favor. He had even thought of the advertising slogan, Rui Du. Master Tan Yin said it was good after using it. If he painted a charmingly naive bald head on the bottle, it would definitely sell well. Chapter 324. The skinny little girl sat on a big rock at the entrance of the alley, looking at the pedestrians coming and going on the street. She took out a small cloth bag from her bosom, opened it layer by layer, and a faint sweet smell filled the air. It was a small piece of candied plum. The girl carefully tore a small piece from the edge, wrapped the rest, and hid it in her bosom. She placed a small piece of candied plum in her mouth and was reluctant to swallow it. Only when the taste that was sweeter than honey was completely gone did she carefully chew it. She took out the small cloth bag again and repeated the action just now. She had been eating the half piece of candied plum that her mother gave her in the end like this for a whole day. In his memory, this kind of fragrance could only be smelled at the entrance of a shop called 10 Miles Fragrance. Furthermore, he couldn't be discovered by the shop's employees. They would chase him away while scolding him as little beggar. She was not a beggar. Although she didn't have beautiful new clothes to wear, she always washed her clothes clean, cleaner than all the children she had seen. Customers didn't like a dirty girl in a noodle shop. She didn't like the staff of Ten Li Xiang, they always called her little beggar. She liked the brother she saw yesterday. Because he treated her to delicious food, the next time she saw him, she must treat him to noodles, free of charge. Her grandmother was sick, and her mother didn't go out today, so she definitely wouldn't see that brother today. The little girl was a little disappointed. No one had ever praised her name, except for her mother and uncle. Everyone looked at her strangely, even her father was no exception. Since the day her father sent her and her mother back to her grandmother's house, she hadn't seen him again. He Duanwu, little beggar, mother gave birth, no father to teach me. A group of children ran over from a distance, pointing at the girl sitting on the rock, laughing and talking. The girl didn't look at them, sat up, patted the dust off her body, turned around and walked into the alley. The group of children obviously didn't want her to leave like this, so they sped up, ran over and surrounded her. She was about to walk out, but was suddenly pushed by an older child on the shoulder, causing her to fall to the ground. He Duanwu, why didn't you clean the table today? Your family doesn't sell noodles? He Duanwu, I saw your father on the street today. The oldest of the children seemed to be 10 years old and the youngest was only 5 or 6 years old. They were talking one after another. The girl got up from the ground and bit her lip. She wanted to get out of the crowd but was pushed back in. These years, the He family's life has not been too good. Elderly sighed and said, back then, young master and Miss He left the capital city and embarrassed the house of high dukes. Although the Li family has been declining, they still have a foundation in the capital city. They still have to be careful when they do things, but the He family is different. Miss He's father was already seriously ill, and he passed away after a few days. The He family's eldest son was already engaged, but due to the pressure from the house of high dukes, he quickly came to cancel the engagement. Your other aunt was also delayed for a few years before she was married, but she was sent back by her husband's family in less than 2 years. I'm afraid it's also because of the house of high dukes. The old man sighed and continued, fortunately the He family is just a commoner, and the house of high dukes won't use more underhanded methods to protect their reputation. The Li family can't help them openly, but they have helped them resolve a lot of trouble in the dark. It's good that young master goes to meet them, and they should know about Miss He's situation. There was an endless stream of people on the street, and elderly told Li Yi about these things in detail. Li Yi could still remember the face of the man who carried him everywhere to seek medical help on a snowy night. There was another figure in his mind that he could not see clearly. And that figure was the person closest to him in this world. Whether it was the Li family or the He family, there wasn't much of a difference in his heart. Their bodies had the same bloodline as this body, and it brought him an irreplaceable sense of closeness. This was something he couldn't feel from Rui and the others. Hey, there used to be a noodle stall here, why isn't it here today? The chubby boy had been anticipating something along the way, and when he reached the corner of the street, he suddenly said in surprise. There was a hint of disappointment in his voice. He had planned to let his big brother see how delicious this noodle stall was, and also ask him to teach him martial arts. Now, it seemed that his wish had been temporarily dashed. Since yesterday the chubby boy had obviously been pestering him, and this time he even wanted to follow him out. Hearing his words, Li Yi raised his head and looked around. The place where he ate the noodles yesterday was empty. The woman and the little girl were gone. But thinking about what happened yesterday, it was normal that they didn't come out to set up a stall today. The mother and daughter looked quite pitiful. If possible, Li Yi wanted to buy the recipe for the noodle stall. Under normal circumstances, a few hundred taels of silver would be enough for a family of 5 to live comfortably for the rest of their lives, even if they ran out of money. One reason was because he really liked the taste of the noodle, and the reason why he was willing to spend several times the price of the noodle recipe was purely because he had an indescribable good impression of the little girl. Young master, the He family is in front. After turning a corner and walking a few dozen steps, Elderly pointed to a deep alley and said, the He family is in there. Even in the future, even in the most prosperous cities, there would still be old and run-down places, let alone in this era. In the capital, not only did the royal family and various officials and nobles live there were also poor families who could not eat their fill in the inner city of the capital. This was clearly a place similar to the slums. When Li Yi and the other two followed a narrow alley, the road ahead was blocked by a group of children. The alley was already narrow, and with 7 or 8 children surrounding it, there was no way to get through. Little beggar, your father doesn't want you anymore. What's that in your hand? Let us see. Let go. If you don't let go, I'll beat you. What are you doing? Seeing a young girl being pushed and shoved by them, Li quickly walked over and yelled, come on, come on, come on. Seeing that someone had arrived, the naughty brats immediately scattered. The girl picked up a cloth bag from the ground. It had been accidentally dropped by them in the process of fighting over it. She patted the dust off it and carefully kept it in her bosom. Then, she raised her head to look at the figure walking over, and her small face couldn't help but be slightly startled. Li walked over and gently patted the dust off her body and asked, Duanwu, why are you here? Where's your mother? My family lives here and my mother is at home brewing medicine for my grandmother. Seeing that big brother again, the little girl raised her head and said with a smile. With that, she suddenly tilted her head and watched as the little fatty stuffed a fragrant pastry into his mouth. The little fatty blushed under her gaze and handed over the paper bag in his hand and asked, Do you want to eat? Duanwu? As if remembering something, Li suddenly looked at her and asked, What's your surname? My surname is He Duanwu. The little girl raised her head and looked at him with her large, bright eyes as she spoke in a small voice. Chapter 325. Mother, get up and drink your medicine. The woman in the coarse dress brought in a bowl of black medicine and walked to the bedside. She spoke softly to the old woman lying on the bed. Cough, cough. The old woman had a head full of white hair and her face was full of wrinkles. She stared blankly in front of her and tried to sit up. The woman hurriedly reached out her hand. Where did you get the money to buy medicine? The old woman grabbed the woman's hand and stared blankly at the door. At this moment, the woman could clearly see that there was no spirit in her eyes. She must have been blind for a long time. Business has been good these days, so I saved some money. The woman placed the bowl of medicine next to the old woman's mouth and said. The old woman murmured, What's the point of wasting this money? This old woman doesn't have many days left to live. It's better to save it for Duanwu. Mother, don't say these things anymore. Hurry up and drink your medicine. The woman sighed and urged. She glanced at a jar in the corner of the room. Buried under the jar was the silver that the young master gave her yesterday. After using that money to buy medicine for her mother, there was still more than 9 taels left. If she used it sparingly, it would be enough for a family for a few years. She must not let those people find it. Those 2 young masters were good people. Good people should be rewarded. She silently prayed in her heart that nothing bad would happen to them. The old woman silently drank the medicine. The woman picked up the bowl of medicine. Before she could put it down, a clear voice came from outside the door. Mother, I'm back. Hearing the girl's voice, the woman's lips curled into a smile. Tomorrow she would go out and buy a few feet of flowery cloth to make a new dress for Duanwu. She had wanted a beautiful flowery dress for a long time. The little girl happily jumped into the room and stuffed a white thing into the woman's mouth. She happily asked, Mother, is it sweet? Before she could react, a few figures walked in from outside the door. The woman's expression changed and hurriedly protected the little girl behind her. Could it be that those people had come again? The first thing that came into view was an old face. The woman was slightly startled, and the vigilant expression on her face disappeared. All these years, every time they encountered a problem that they couldn't solve, this old man would appear. Although they had never talked to each other, she could roughly guess his origins. When another familiar face appeared before her eyes, she stood up immediately. Did someone come? The old woman couldn't see, but she could feel that there was an outsider in the house. From the looks of it, it didn't seem to be those villains who often came. Her son worked during the day and only came back at night. She felt strange in her heart. How many years had it been since outsiders came to this house? After Li entered the house, he looked around. It wasn't an exaggeration to use this phrase to describe a family with only 4 bare walls. Other than a stove and a bed, there was no other furniture. There were only 4 walls. The only bed was in the corner, and an old woman with white hair was lying on it. There was also a small room inside, separated by a curtain. Through the gap one could see some clues. The space was not big, probably only enough for a bed. Benefactor, the woman hurriedly walked over, rubbing her hands. She seemed very nervous. If it wasn't for the young master in front of her, she wouldn't have the money to buy medicine for her mother. Those 10 taels of silver could be considered as the money to save their lives. What? Li looked at the woman and said. The woman was about to open her mouth to say something, but suddenly heard the young noble say something. She was startled, her mouth opened halfway, and her expression became blank. He family Xiaonyang's son. The old man with the surname Li took a step forward, looked at the woman and said, This is your sister's child. Jianghu, is Jianghu back? Where's Jianghu? Before the woman could react, an anxious voice suddenly came from the room. The old woman was anxious to get off the bed. Because she couldn't see, she tripped and rolled off the bed, but she didn't care at all. She struggled in the direction of the door. Mother. The woman exclaimed and hurriedly ran over to help the old woman up. The old woman stared blankly at the direction of the door. 2 lines of tears rolled down from her empty eyes. She murmured, "My Jade Nyang, where is my Jade Nyang?" The little girl stood there blankly. She didn't know what had happened. It was the first time she saw her grandmother like this. Her face was pale and she didn't know what to do. "Grandmother, don't worry. Mother is not in the capital. I came this time to take you back." Li didn't know if the old woman would be able to take such a blow if he told her that the Jade Nyang she spoke of had already passed away over 10 years ago. At this time he could only comfort her like this. As for the truth of the matter, it was better to tell her slowly. After seeing that they had lived in such a place all these years, he could guess what kind of hard life they had lived. Naturally he couldn't ignore it. Just now, Li Yi had already thought of taking them back to Qing and Fu. No matter how long the hands of the nobles in the capital stretched, they couldn't reach Qing and Fu. "You are Jade Nyang's child?" As if thinking of something, the old woman temporarily forgot about the matter of Jade Nyang. She grabbed Li Yi's hand and continuously rubbed her calloused and rough palm on his face. She murmured, "Jade Nyang's child, my grandson, he is so handsome like Jade Nyang." As the old woman spoke, her voice gradually became softer. She tilted her head and let out a light snore. Great joy and great sorrow were the most hurtful. Li Yi hurriedly helped the old woman to the bed and had her lie flat. After covering her with the blanket, he turned his head and saw that the woman, who was his aunt, was looking at him with a complicated expression. Actually, when he found out that the little girl's name was He Duanwu, Li Yi understood where that familiar and intimate feeling came from. Because both of them had half of the He family's blood flowing in them. And the reason why he was familiar with the stall's noodles was probably because he had eaten it when he was young. "Aunt Xiao, pack up. We'll leave today." From Uncle Li he found out that the youngest daughter of the He family was called He Xiao. Li looked back at the old woman and said, "Okay." Hearing Li Yi's unwavering tone, the old woman opened her mouth and finally spat out a word. Seeing that the little girl was standing there in a daze, Li Yi walked over and rubbed her little head. The old woman followed and looked at the little girl. She said, "Duanwu, this is Big Brother." The little girl nodded mechanically and raised her head to look at Li Yi. Using a mosquito-like voice she said, "Big Brother." Her little brain still hadn't figured out what had happened, but she knew that this Big Brother was different from the one she had silently called out in her heart. Chapter 326. The old man had fallen into a deep sleep, and his aunt was packing up the house. Fatty Li Yingkai and Duanwu were sitting on a large rock by the door, showing off his treasured delicacies one by one. No one knew how many delicacies he had hidden in his clothes, and the fragrance of the delicacies drifted far away, attracting the attention of a few children who hid far away and swallowed their saliva. "Come, don't be shy, eat." He generously pushed all the delicacies to Duanwu and patted his chest. "I still have a lot at home, I'll treat you to even better food next time." After thinking for a bit he added, "But you also have to treat me to your family's noodles." The temptation of delicacies to children was not small. Finally, a little girl of about 7 or 8 years old slowly walked over. She pointed at a pastry in a paper bag and said, "Little brother, can I eat this?" A kind smile appeared on the fatty's face and he straightforwardly said, "Not giving." Seeing the little girl walk away with tears streaming down her face, the fatty's mouth twitched. The reason why he gave these delicacies to Duanwu was because she was his older brother's younger sister, which meant she was his younger sister. Don't think that he didn't see that Duanwu was the only one surrounded by people. She still wanted to ask him for food? In her dreams. "Young master, shouldn't we discuss this matter with our family first?" At the entrance, the old man surnamed Li looked at Li Yi and said with an awkward expression, "Why should we discuss it?" Li looked at him and asked. Elder Li sighed and said, "These years the family has helped them a lot, but we never did it openly. Otherwise, it would cause the Qin family to be even more dissatisfied. Once they get serious, the He family will face even more trouble. If young master wants to bring them home, it is not impossible, but you should at least discuss it with the old madam or the second master. There are many people in the Li family who are still brooding over what happened in the past. If young master doesn't say anything, you will meet with a lot of resistance." Hearing this, Li Yi shook his head and said, "I'm not going to bring them back to the Li family." When the old man heard this, he was stunned. Just as he was about to ask, Li Yi had already ordered the Li family guards to look for a palanquin on the street. As for the other guards, they walked into the alley and stood guard here. "What's going on with the He family?" "I don't know. Why are there so many people? Is someone here to cause trouble again? Their family has always been very strange. Who knows what happened? But looking at them, are they moving? So what if they moved? I heard that the He family offended a powerful official in the capital. Didn't you see how they survived all these years? Even if they moved away, I'm afraid they will end up the same. People from the other families who lived in the same alley kept walking to the door. They looked in the direction of the He family's house, pointed at it, and discussed in low voices. Among them, a middle-aged woman wearing a coarse long skirt saw the scene in front of the He family's house. Her expression changed a few times, and she quietly walked out of the alley. At this time, Li Yi and the two children were already walking on the street. Seeing the clothes that the little girl was wearing full of patches, Li Yi frowned and decided to take her to the tailor's shop first. Because there was no uniform size system, there were no ready-made clothes on the street. Usually, clothes had to be tailored in advance. There were many clothes in the tailor's shop, and they were all custom-made. It wasn't difficult to find a suitable dress for the little girl. "Sir, this is a reservation by another customer, so it can't be sold. How about this? I'll first measure this little girl's size, then pick a piece of fabric that you're satisfied with. 2 days, just 2 days. You can come back to pick it up after 2 days. I guarantee that your clothes will be ready," the manager of the tailor's shop said with a troubled expression. However, the troubled expression on his face disappeared when he saw the ingot of silver on the table. "This dress looks really good on a little girl. There are a few other pieces here that are not bad either. Would young master like to take a look?" He wrapped the few pieces of clothing together and sent Li Yi out the door with a fawning expression. "Take care, young master. You're welcome to come again next time." The distance between an ugly duckling and a white swan was actually only a piece of clothing. A new dress and a few suitable pieces of jewelry could complete the perfect transformation from a little beggar to a little princess. After coming out of the jewelry shop, Li Yi pinched her little face and said, "You're too thin. You need to eat more in the future to gain weight." The little fatty expressed great agreement with this sentence. He patted his entire chest and said proudly, "That's right. You can only grow as strong as me by eating more." The little girl nodded and secretly decided that she definitely wouldn't eat more in the future. She held onto Li Yi's hand tightly, afraid that he would disappear the moment she let go, just like how he had suddenly appeared. If her brother disappeared, no one would buy new clothes and beautiful jewelry for her. Thinking of her appearance in the mirror just now, her heart was unprecedentedly happy. After renting a courtyard in an inn and paying the deposit, Li Yi returned to the streets with the two children. It was not suitable for them to live in the Li family, but if they lived outside, they would have to worry about the public house's revenge. They found someone on the street and asked for a certain address. They bought 2 dough figurines from a roadside stall, one for each child. The little fatty bit off the head of the dough figurine and muttered that there was not enough honey in the dough figurine, so it was tasteless. Li was thinking about something else. Because he had received a modern education, he had always thought that elopement was very romantic. Modern people pursued free love, and the story of elopement for love in ancient times was revered to a very high level. The story of Sima Xiangru and Zhuo Wenjun, a male phoenix seeking a female phoenix, was envied by many people. However, the reality was cruel. Sima Xiangru and Zhuo Wenjun had only been a couple since ancient times. In the end, Zhuo Wenjun had to sing, "I wish to find the one who loves me and never part with me," to change Sima Xiangru's mind. Even so, it was a good ending. Li Yi had read through the criminal files of Anxi County. Due to elopement, the man's name was expelled from the clan, and the woman's life was forfeited. There were countless cases of elopement. Actually, the ending for his parents was not bad. After all, the two of them had escaped from the shackles of their families. Although their days in the Li family village were hard, they should still be very happy. He could feel this in his memory. However, in the distant capital, there were still some people who were suffering for them. Because of this, the Qin family and the Li family lost face, but it was still a small matter. What crime did the rest of the He family commit? Did they have to suffer 20 years of revenge? What did the young lady of the Qin family do to have her lifelong happiness destroyed just like that? Thinking of this, Li Yi could not even blame the Qin family too much. With his status, he naturally could not blame his parents. What a sin. Stories were all lies. He would never believe in romantic love stories again. Li Yi let out a long sigh in his heart and stopped thinking about this matter. At this time, they had already walked to the door of an imposing mansion. "Stop, who are you and what are you here for?" The young gatekeeper was originally sitting on a chair and drinking tea leisurely. Seeing someone walk up the stairs, he immediately walked over. Please go in and inform them that the Crown Prince's friend is here. It was the first time that Li Yi had come to the Crown Prince's mansion. This gatekeeper was very unfamiliar and was not originally from Prince Ning's mansion. The gatekeeper glanced at the three of them. A young man with 2 children, what kind of strange combination was this? He did not even have a follower by his side, so he definitely did not have a noble identity. He claimed to be the Crown Prince's friend. The Crown Prince had only been in Jing for a few days, and the places he frequently went, other than the Imperial Palace, it was the Crown Prince's mansion. How could he have any friends? This guy, could he be pretending to be the Crown Prince's friend? After being a gatekeeper for so many years, he had some ability to see people. What kind of person was the Crown Prince? The friends that the Crown Prince knew were naturally not rich or noble. That kind of superior temperament could not be faked. The person in front of him, did he really think that by wearing decent clothes he could pretend to be the Crown Prince's friend? Go 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 go. The Crown Prince is very busy, how can he see just anyone? The gatekeeper impatiently waved his hand. There were countless people who wanted to visit the Crown Prince every day. If he went to bother the Crown Prince every time someone came, he would have packed up and left long ago. What's more, this guy did not even have the most basic greeting card. He lacked the most basic sincerity. Bastard, how can you say that? The young gatekeeper was about to go back and continue drinking tea. Before he could turn around, his butt was kicked by someone and he immediately rolled on the ground. Chapter 327. There were countless nobles in the capital, and the noble families were highly respected. Even the servants in the manors felt that they were a cut above others. The gatekeeper rolled on the ground from the kick, and his front teeth almost fell out. He was immediately enraged and crawled up from the ground. Just as he was about to curse, his angry expression immediately turned into a flattering one. Bodyguard Lin, do you have any orders? Bodyguard Lin had followed the Crown Prince from Jianghu to the capital. Aside from the Crown Prince and his consort, he was the most powerful person in the manor. Even if the gatekeeper had 10 times the courage, he wouldn't dare to be presumptuous in front of Bodyguard Lin. Bodyguard Lin didn't pay any attention to the gatekeeper. He walked to Li Yi's side and smiled. Li, you came at the right time. His Highness has just returned from the palace and has been waiting for you for a long time. Hearing Bodyguard Lin's words, the gatekeeper's legs almost gave way and he knelt on the ground. What kind of person would make the Crown Prince wait for so long? More importantly, he had actually stopped such a person at the door? It wasn't until the young man and the 2 children walked into the manor under Bodyguard Lin's guidance that the gatekeeper finally couldn't help but sit on the ground. Cold sweat poured from his forehead, and the bitter smile on his face was uglier than crying. This way, the Crown Prince's manor was very large, at least much larger than the Li family. Li Xian's head guard led the way while Li Yi brought the 2 children. After a quarter of an hour they were still walking through the manor. He secretly calculated how much it would cost to buy such a large manor. According to the geographical location, it was almost within the first ring of the capital. What would the housing prices within the first ring of the capital be like in the future? If there really was such a large piece of land, the 18 generations of his descendants wouldn't have to worry about it. Little Fatty, who had always been bold, stopped talking after entering the Crown Prince's residence. After all, the environment he grew up in was not ordinary, so he naturally had more experience. He knew that the people who could live in such a place were much more powerful than the Li family. As for the little girl, Duanwu, she held onto Li Yi's hand and looked around curiously. However, she felt that this place was really big. Her feet were a bit sore from walking, but she still hadn't walked out. The place they were moving to wasn't as big as this. On the grassy slope behind the Crown Prince's residence, the young guard carried a huge kite on his back. After a run-up, he rushed down the slope. Gradually, the tips of his feet began to leave the ground, and his entire body slowly rose into the air. When he was 2 zhang above the ground, he swung his arms and tilted his body, and the huge kite also tilted at an angle. Like a large bird, it began to hover in the air, attracting the cheers of the guards on the grassy slope. Patter. The fatty stared blankly at the scene. The pastry he had just taken out fell to the ground. His eyes were filled with fear as he pointed at the guard in the sky and shouted, He's flying. The little girl also widened her eyes and opened her mouth slightly, unable to say a word. It was as if the 2 children had seen a whole new world. They stood there in a daze, unable to move their feet. Li Yi had no choice but to walk over alone. How is it? Li Xian had a proud look on his face. He realized that not only could this thing prevent people from getting hurt when they jumped down from a high place, but it could also allow them to make a turn in the air with just a small change in angle. In his opinion, this was no different from a bird flying. Even the guards of the prince's residence didn't dare to jump down from a cliff that was dozens of zhang high. This kind of difficult operation was not something that a pig or a dog could do. When he developed the thing that could be carried on his back and jumped off the cliff, these guards would be able to charge higher into the sky. To be able to do this to this extent is already very good. Li Yi nodded and said. It was a tragedy for Li Xian to be born in this era where science had not yet sprouted. If he was born a few hundred years later, perhaps the people who invented the airplane would be the Li brothers. So humans can really fly in the sky. If they can fly even higher, won't they really be no different from birds? Li Xian murmured. If they can fly even higher, then there will no longer be a need for mounted scouts on the battlefield, and there will no longer be any ambushes. The distribution of the enemy's forces, the amount of provisions, and the terrain of the battle will be clear at a glance from the sky. Li Yi patted Li Xian's shoulder and said, How is it? Do you feel that the responsibility on your shoulders has suddenly become heavier? Li Xian curled his lips indifferently and said, I just want to see them fly. As for how Uncle Huang wants to use them, that's his business. The guards in the sky were flying lower and lower. There were guards on the ground specifically recording the time and height of their flight. When Li Xian walked over, he suddenly froze and pointed at the little girl not far away. He turned to look at Li Yi and asked, Why is she here? You can't really. She's still a child. Li Yi resisted the urge to say, Scram. He calmed himself down and said, That's my younger sister. The lady boss who sold noodles yesterday is my aunt. Li Xian took a long time to understand the ins and outs of the matter. He asked, You came to borrow people from me to protect their safety? Li Yi nodded. That's good. If Marquis Chen's mansion wants to deal with ordinary families, there are indeed many ways. You can use the guards of Crown Prince's mansion as you wish. They're all carefully selected by my father. With them around, there shouldn't be any problems. Li Xian added, Also, the man we met at the county office yesterday is the capital magistrate, Chen Yu. He's also from the Chen family. I think the Chen family is behind him to make things difficult for the mother and son. But don't worry about this. Uncle Huang doesn't like officials who bend the law for personal gain, especially in a place like the capital. Chen Yu will be transferred to another province in 2 days. We don't know who the new capital magistrate will be, but it definitely won't be the surname Chen. After saying that, Li Xian went over to check his kite. Since Li Yi didn't intend to bring his mother's family to the Li family, he naturally wouldn't use the guards of the Li family. In the vast capital city, there were only 2 people he could absolutely trust. Mingzi lived in the palace, so he couldn't meet her at will. Li Yi didn't want to see her either, so Li Xian was the only one left. His straightforward attitude moved Li Yi quite a bit. Although he was a little silly sometimes, he was the kind of friend who could be relied on at critical times. Seeing Li Yi walking over to check the big kite, Li Yi waved to a guard. Go get a pen and paper. Although the guard didn't know why Li Yi wanted a pen and paper, he still followed his order and quickly brought it over. There was already pen and paper here. A table was placed on the grass and it was filled with simple drawings. 2 guards directly carried the table over. Li Yi picked up the pen and quickly sketched on a blank piece of paper. Soon, a bird-like object with long wings appeared on the paper. What's this? Li Xian walked over and asked with a puzzled look. A glider. A glider? Li Xian was still a bit puzzled. It can enable your guards to fly higher and farther. Having got a simple shape, Li Yi started to mark the size. There were a few key parts that needed to be enlarged. Higher and farther. Hearing these words, Li Xian's eyes shone at once. On the top of a grassy slope not far away, the little fatty's eyes were full of admiration when he saw another person flying up with a big kite on his back. However, when he lowered his head and looked at his own body, his eyes dimmed. In a further place, a beautiful woman was standing on the bedside of a delicate attic. Hearing the cheers from the grassy slope, she lowered her head and added the last stroke to the picture on the table. In the picture, some weird kites were flying in the azure sky. Chapter 328. In the Ming dynasty of another world, there was also a man named Wanhu who had the dream of flying into the sky. He tied the rocket to a chair and wanted to fly to the moon to have intimate contact with Chang'e for the first time. Of course he failed and even lost his life. Obviously, Li Xian was much smarter than Wan Hu. He never risked his life, instead he just wanted to send his guards to the sky. However, based on his knowledge, it was as difficult as hell for him to realize this dream. His whole life was far from enough. What Li Yi could do for him was to guide him onto the right path and reduce the amount of time he would have to waste due to detours. The drawing he drew on the paper was the simplest and most primitive glider, which was so simple that it was not driven by power. Even so, it would take Li Xian a lot of time to make it. After selecting 6 guards and instructing them to follow Li Yi, Li Xian started to study the drawing carefully. It was better not to disturb him at this moment. Li Yi didn't bid farewell to him. Instead, he just left with the 2 kids silently. After passing through a long corridor, he bumped into some figures walking towards him. "Nice to meet you, princess." The guards behind her all bowed to her. Li Yi raised his head and saw a strange and beautiful woman. It should be the first time for him to see Li Xian's wife. Yesterday in the cold mountain temple, as she was wearing a mask, he didn't see her look clearly. When Li Xian was in Qing'an Prefecture, he once said that his fiancée was a first-class beauty in the world. Now that he met her, he knew that the rumor was true. The young woman in front of him not only had an outstanding look, but also faintly revealed an air of nobility that commoners didn't have. Undoubtedly, the temperament of the daughter of a big family had been fully revealed. Pitifully, it seemed that Li Xian had not been enlightened in this aspect. He didn't look like an experienced woman at all. For him, a drawing of a glider was far more attractive than an unparalleled beauty. "Greetings, Crown Prince Consort." In the end, the 2 of them were people from 2 different worlds. Li Yi cupped his hands together and spoke softly. After seeing the other party nod slightly, Li Yi took large strides forward. The woman looked deeply in the direction in which Li Yi had left and said softly, "Yanji, do you know that young man just now?" "Crown Princess, that is Li Yi Li. He is a friend of the Crown Prince from Qing'an Prefecture," a young girl beside her replied. She had originally been Ning Wang Fei's personal servant girl. This time, when Wang Yi and Wang Fei had returned to Qing'an Fu, they hadn't taken her with them. Now, all of the internal affairs of the Shitzi Fu were personally managed by her. "Oh, he's Li Yi?" The woman looked back at the direction of the grassy slope, her eyelids slightly drooping. Her husband had always liked to study those strange things and never socialized with others, including herself. It was as if no one could integrate into his world, except for that young man just now. The 2 of them did not talk much, but she had heard this name more than once. In this world, there should only be one person who could pat her husband's shoulder, right? She was really curious, what kind of person was he, or rather, what kind of person was her husband? Li Yi quickly forgot about Li Xian's beautiful crown princess. He still had many things to do. For example, bringing his aunt and grandmother to the inn's small courtyard. The old lady seemed to be sick and he needed to find a reliable doctor. After they went, did he need to buy some daily necessities? He didn't know if the inn would provide them. Of course, the most important thing was how he could explain to the old lady about his deceased mother. He had hoped for her for 20 years, but found out that his daughter had already passed away 10 years ago. It was said that the white-haired person had to send off the black-haired person. But what was even more tragic was that the white-haired person didn't even have the chance to send off the black-haired person. The old lady was already very pitiful. If she suffered such a blow again, it was hard to say if she could survive. But the truth couldn't be hidden. Li Yi couldn't think of a good way along the way. When he walked back to the alley again, he heard a noise coming from inside. He walked in quickly and saw a few strange men lying in front of the He family's door, wailing incessantly. The guards of the Li family stood at the side and looked at them coldly. There were also many people watching from afar. "What happened?" Li walked over and asked. A guard came over and said, "Not long after young master left, these people appeared and wanted to stop us. Then we fought with them and the result is like this." Obviously, although the guards of the Li family were not 1 in 100 or 1 in 1,000, they had no problem dealing with a few street bullies. Li didn't even ask who ordered them to do this. Li Xian just told him that yesterday afternoon, the Chen family sent people to the Crown Prince's mansion to apologize, but they didn't even enter the gate of the Crown Prince's mansion. Now they couldn't even take care of themselves. These people should have been arranged by them before. "Where are we going?" The old lady had already woken up. She was helped out by Duan Wu's mother. She murmured, "Did Lady Jade come to pick us up? Where is Lady Jade? Why didn't she come herself?" When the guards of the Li family helped her into the sedan chair, the wrinkles on the old lady's face smoothed out. The old lady had another son who was Li Yi's uncle who worked outside and went out early and came back late. Li Yi asked a guard of the Li family to wait here. When he came back, the guard would take him directly to the inn. After returning to the inn, Li Yi asked Uncle Li and the guards of the Li family to go back first. There would be no problem with the people of the Crown Prince's mansion here. Inside the room, Duanwu was carefully putting the delicacies that Brother Fatty had given her into the old lady's mouth. Li Yi stood in the courtyard and looked at the peaceful scene in the room from afar. He finally realized that he had a few more relatives in this world. The woman named Hishio walked out of the room and came to Li Yi's side. She looked up at him and asked softly, "Child, tell Aunt your mother she." Li Yi sighed and said softly, "My mother, she passed away more than 10 years ago." The woman's body trembled. Even though she had already guessed the truth, her face couldn't help but pale. Tears instantly rolled down her face. "This matter? Don't worry, I won't tell mother." The woman wiped the corner of her eyes and said, "After sister passed away, mother cried until her eyes went blind. For the past 20 years she has been hoping for her to come back every day, let's just hide it from her." Li Yi sighed again. He had always thought that crying until one's eyes went blind was just an exaggerated expression in literature. Only now did he realize that it was just his ignorance. Where's my grandson?" The voice of the old lady came from inside the room. Li Yi quickly walked in. Chapter 329. Dinner was sent over by the inn's waiter. The little fatty and Li Yi stayed for dinner. The little fatty, who had lived a luxurious life, clearly had little interest in the inn's food. Duanwu took the chicken leg that Li Yi had torn for her and gnawed on it. In the past she rarely had the chance to eat meat. When her uncle came back from outside, he would occasionally bring her some small food, the kind that could be bought with 2 copper coins. That was her happiest moment. During dinner, Li Yi chatted with the old man for a while, trying to avoid mentioning his late mother. The old man had no objection to moving his family to Qing and Prefecture. Home was only where there was family. After suffering for so many years in the capital, there wasn't much he missed here. Originally, he had been intentionally or unintentionally asking about Li Yi's mother. After hearing that Li Yi had a family, the old man's attention was diverted. He was clearly excited and his empty eyes seemed to glow again. "Come to think of it, you're going to be crowned soon. You should hurry up and carry on the family line." The old man repeatedly said this during dinner. Speaking of this topic, Li Yi could only smile bitterly. If it wasn't for the matter in the capital, he would have started this great task a long time ago. After dinner and drinking medicine, the old man fell into a deep sleep. Li Yi looked at the sky. He had been busy the whole day and it was time to go back. He left a few dozen taels of silver for Duanwu's mother to keep in case he needed it. Walking out the door, he saw a few guards of the Crown Prince's manor standing in the yard. "I'll have to trouble you for the next few days." Li Yi walked over and saluted them with his hands folded in front of his chest. "You're welcome, Li." The leading guard smiled and said, "Don't worry, with us here there won't be any problems." As for the ability of the guards of the Crown Prince's manor, Li Yi was very confident. He didn't say much more. After waving goodbye to Duanwu, who had walked him to the door, he took the little fatty back to the Li family. He had just come out of the inn with the little fatty and the 2 guards of the Li family. When they were walking on the street, someone walked toward them. "Excuse me, young master. My master invites you to the Golden Phoenix Pavilion for a chat." A young man dressed like a manservant approached Huang Xiaolong with a faint smile. Li Yi asked doubtfully, "Can you tell me who your master is?" "Young master, you'll know when you get there." The manservant was obviously unwilling to reveal the other party's identity. "Then I won't go." Li Yi simply turned around and left. He did not have many friends in the capital. Obviously the other party could not be Li Xian or Emingzu. Of course, it could not be the old monk that he just met. Since they weren't even friends, what was the point of chatting? The manservant didn't expect Li Yi to refuse so straightforwardly. He was a little anxious as he stepped forward and said, "Young master, please wait." The 2 guards of the Li family stood on either side of Li Yi. If the person in front of them made any moves, they would immediately arrest him. "Young master, my master does not have any ill intentions," the manservant quickly explained. He took out an item from his sleeve and said, "Please take a look at this." Li Yi took a step back vigilantly. What if the thing this fellow took out from his sleeve was the Pear Blossom Storm Needle or the Flying Goose Arrow, and he was caught off guard? Wouldn't he die a wrongful death? Fortunately, the manservant didn't have such thoughts. The thing he took out was a handkerchief. The handkerchief looked old. The corners were slightly yellowed, and 2 mandarin ducks were embroidered on the handkerchief. The person who embroidered this handkerchief was obviously an expert in needlework. Li Yi had received many handkerchiefs before, and the one in his hand was the most exquisite. The expressions of the 2 guards of the Li family clearly didn't look right. They looked at Li Yi with admiration and envy. A woman giving a man a handkerchief, what else could it mean? Now she even dared to invite him. What was this young master waiting for? They didn't expect that he had only been in the capital for 2 short days, and a woman had fallen in love with him. It seemed that they had greatly underestimated this young master who had just returned to the Li family. The confusion on Li Yi's face deepened. If this was in Jianghu Prefecture, it wouldn't be strange at all. But this was the capital. How could someone know him? Moreover, the handkerchief was usually given to a woman. Who would give an old handkerchief? Looking at the age of this handkerchief, it would take at least 10 years to achieve this effect. You can't have mistaken me for someone else, right? Li Yi asked the manservant. Young master, is your surname Li? The manservant also looked at Li Yi suspiciously. Yes, he was almost the same as the portrait he had seen. The only thing he couldn't figure out was that this young master seemed to be a little too young. However, the portrait couldn't be wrong. After seeing Huang Xiaolong nod his head, the manservant didn't have any more doubts. Since young master's surname is Li, there can't be any mistake. The manservant said with absolute certainty. You 2 bring Inkai back first. Li Yi instructed the 2 guards. He still decided to go and take a look. The reason why he didn't need the 2 guards to follow him was because, with their fighting strength, they definitely wouldn't be able to handle something that even he couldn't. Moreover, Golden Phoenix restaurant was just across the street. Nighttime was the time when the restaurant's business was at its peak. With so many people coming and going, there wouldn't be any problems. The 2 guards naturally wouldn't delay their young master's appointment with a beauty. They forcefully dragged the little fatty away. Young master, please. The manservant smiled and made an inviting gesture. Wait a moment. Li Yi still felt that it wasn't safe. He called for 2 guards from the crown prince's residence. There was nothing wrong with being more cautious. What if there really was a woman with bad intentions and coveted his beauty? If there were more people with his mediocre martial arts, he wouldn't be able to resist. Li Yi remembered that there was a brothel called Golden Phoenix Restaurant in Jianghu Prefecture. The top courtesan there had even gifted him a handkerchief. But here, Golden Phoenix Restaurant was really just a restaurant. The restaurant's business was very good. The lobby downstairs was filled with customers. Li Yi followed the manservant up to the 2nd floor. The manservant didn't seem to mind the 2 strangers following behind Li Yi, as if he really didn't have any ill intentions. Young master, my master is inside. You can go in by yourself. After leading Li Yi and the others to a quiet room at the end of the corridor, the manservant immediately retreated. Li Yi didn't know what was going on. He lightly knocked on the door. Come in, a gentle female voice came from inside the room. There seemed to be a slight tremble in the voice, but Li Yi wasn't sure if it was a misperception. The door was unlatched. After pushing the door open, Li Yi hesitated for a moment before stepping in. Chapter 330. Jiner, do you think he will come? The lady who was drawing her eyebrows in front of the bronze mirror seemed to be talking to herself. Young miss is so beautiful, he will definitely come. A young maid who was about 15 or 16 years old stood beside her and immediately said. Looking at the lady in front of her, even she could not help but show a trace of envy on her face. If she could maintain her youthful appearance like Miss 20 years later, how great would that be? Beautiful. The lady in the bronze mirror had picturesque eyebrows and a dignified appearance. She looked to be in her 20s, but there was a trace of crow's feet at the corner of her eyes that could not be erased. How could there not be some traces left after 20 years? Even if she was a budding young girl, she should have long become a married woman, in people's mouths now. He rejected me once 20 years ago. Is he going to reject me again today? The lady looked at the sky outside the window with a trace of pain in her eyes and murmured. The young girl did not know what to say at that moment. She whispered, Miss, the food is getting cold. Do you want me to heat it up? When the young girl walked to the table, there was a knock on the door. The lady suddenly stood up and looked outside through the gauze curtain. Come in. She suppressed the excitement in her heart and said with a trembling voice. Li Yi still could not think of anyone else he knew in the capital apart from Her Royal Highness. Moreover, it was a woman who would give him a handkerchief. Of course, it was not from Her Royal Highness. If it was her, Li Yi would definitely run away with Rui in the night. There would be no need to miss old Madame's birthday. Anyone who dared to accept Her Royal Highness's handkerchief as a token of love must be tired of living. There was a table in the middle of the room with a few dishes on it. Opposite the curtain there were two indistinct figures. The curtain was lifted and a young girl about 15 or 16 years old walked out quickly. Before Li Yi could open his mouth to ask, another voice came from inside. "You're finally willing to see me?" This time Li Yi heard it clearly. The voice was indeed trembling. At the same time, he was sure that the manservant had found the wrong person. The voice was unfamiliar and, more importantly, the sentence contained all sorts of complicated emotions. It was definitely not directed at him. Li Yi placed the handkerchief on the table. Just as he was about to leave, the woman let out a long sigh and said, "20 years ago, you returned the handkerchief I gave you. Now you want to return it a second time. Since you don't want to see me, why did you come?" 20 years ago? Li Yi shook his head. 20 years ago he was still in his mother's womb. "Miss, you've got the wrong person." Li Yi sighed. He wondered which heartless fellow had actually made a girl wait for 20 years. What could he not say clearly? Why did he have to delay the girl's youth? Why did this routine sound so familiar? "You're not him." The curtain was suddenly lifted and Li Yi saw an unfamiliar woman walk out. She seemed to want to say something, but after 2 steps she looked up at him and suddenly froze. "Auntie, what's wrong?" When Li Yi opened his mouth again he couldn't say the word "miss" anymore. Just now the other person said that she had waited for a person for 20 years. 20 years ago, when she had her first awakening of love, she was at least 14 or 15 years old. Now she was probably about the same age as his aunt. Naturally he couldn't call her Miss anymore. However, the other person seemed to have a technique to retain her youth. She looked like she was in her 20s even though she was in her 30s. If one didn't look carefully they wouldn't be able to tell. "Miss?" The woman looked at Li Yi and bitterly laughed. "So you've already forgotten about me?" Li Yi felt that he was more wrong than Do Yi. Could it be that this Andy was myopic? She couldn't even recognize her lover. Or could it be that not only did he have a common face, but he also looked especially old? If she wasn't myopic then she must be a fool. Such a beautiful woman was actually a fool. The heavens were really cruel. Li Yi sighed and turned to walk out the door. "Don't go, I beg you, don't go, don't leave me alone again." Suddenly, a sorrowful cry came from behind. Then Li Yi found himself being hugged from behind. He was startled and was about to let go of her hands when he heard her choking voice saying, "Ming Han, don't go, I'm willing to be your concubine. I'll go beg my father and brother. If they don't agree I'll threaten them with death. They will definitely agree. Don't leave me behind again, Ming Han." Li Yi's expression changed dramatically. It was as if he had been struck by lightning. You said it when we were young. You said that when I grew up you would marry me. I've waited for so long. 10 years. I've finally grown up, but why didn't you keep your words? Do you know that after you left I was so afraid that you would never come back? Every month I went to beg Bodhisattva. You've finally come back. My brother and the others didn't tell me, but I really want to see you again. The Chen family's daughter can't be a concubine. It doesn't matter, I'll go beg them. They will agree, they will definitely agree." The woman's voice choked with sobs. In a short period of time, Li Yi felt his back become wet. He opened his mouth wanting to speak, but it was as if something was stuck in his throat. He couldn't say a single word. After a long time, Li Yi let out a long sigh. He moved her hand away and turned around. He lowered his head, not daring to look at her eyes. He said in a low voice, "You've got the wrong person. I'm not Li Ming Han." "How could I not recognize you?" The woman didn't even have time to wipe her tears. When she raised her head to look at Li Yi, her body suddenly trembled. She immediately took a few steps back and her face turned pale. "You're not him. Who are you?" She had a look of disbelief on her face. She mumbled, "Why, my name is Li Yi." Li Yi said in a low voice, "Li Ming Han is my father." Yes. The woman was silent for a long time. The way she looked at Li Yi became incomparably complicated. The two of them looked so similar. Even in her excitement she didn't recognize him. It wasn't surprising that her subordinates had mistaken him. Her eyes regained their clarity. She placed the handkerchief on the table in Li Yi's hand and said, "Help me give this handkerchief to your father." Tell him that I'll be waiting for him here tomorrow night at the same time. Li shook his head and said, I'm afraid I can't help you with this matter. The woman raised her head to look at him and said, Don't worry. I won't fight with your mother. I just want to see him again. That's not the reason why I can't help you. Li was silent for a moment. He said with difficulty, because he has been dead for more than 10 years. The expression on the woman's face froze. In that instant, her face turned as white as a sheet of paper. What did you say? Her voice trembled even more. Li lowered his head and said nothing. The woman's body became unsteady. She took a few steps back and leaned against the table to prevent herself from falling. No, how could it be Minghan, how could he? She kept shaking her head and mumbling to herself. Her face turned even paler. She bit her lips tightly and a trickle of blood flowed down the corner of her mouth. Li watched this scene in a daze. He did not know what to do. He had only taken one step when the woman screamed, Leave. I don't want to see you again. You liar. How could Minghan die? Minghan can't be dead. How sinful. Li's heart sank as he looked at the woman who had gone mad. Li did not know how he walked back to the Li family. He ignored the servants' greetings. The little fatty wanted to disturb him but was locked outside the door. After knocking on the door for a long time, he could only leave helplessly. What's wrong with you? Rui jumped off the wall. He looked at Li, who was standing in the courtyard with a dazed expression. He had not moved at all for 2 hours. He walked over and asked, Damn it. Li gripped the embroidered handkerchief in his hand tightly and said in an extremely annoyed tone, What did you say? Lu Rui suddenly raised his head and stared at him in an unfriendly manner. Chapter 331. I was abandoned on the day of my wedding. I've waited for 20 years, and now I'm still willing to be that bastard's concubine? Lu Rui asked angrily. Li nodded helplessly. He even betrayed such an infatuated woman. Who is that bastard and where is he now? Second Miss Lu's eyes were wide open and her eyebrows were vertical. One of her hands was already on the hilt of her sword. She looked like she was going to draw her sword in anger in the next moment and take the life of that fickle lover and heartless man. If she was born in the future, she would definitely be the most radical fighter for women's rights. He's dead. That bastard has been dead for more than 10 years. Li looked at her and said slowly, Come to think of it, you should call that bastard uncle. What? Lu Rui turned around and looked at him. Because he's my father. Mississippi Lu clenched her fists tightly, and a frustrated expression appeared on her pretty face. She finally understood how Li felt just now. After a long time, she exhaled and said angrily, Mother ****. Lu Rui. Li turned around and looked at her. You said something vulgar just now. If you can say it, why can't I? Mississippi Lu said nonchalantly. But you're a woman. So what if I'm a woman? Do you look down on women? A woman who says vulgar words can't get married. You have to get married. I don't want to support you for the rest of your life. Mississippi Lu's chest was heaving up and down, and her eyes were squinting. Even her breathing was getting faster. After a while, her breathing became steady and she cracked her knuckles. She said calmly, I suddenly remembered that I haven't tested your martial arts cultivation for a long time. A gust of wind and rain. The grass in the courtyard was very soft and because it was cleaned every day it was unusually clean. It was quite comfortable to lie on but the ground was a little cold, and a little painful. Li rubbed his chest and buttocks. These were the two areas that Lu Rui had focused on. From the looks of it, she had indeed neglected her martial arts training. In the past, she could last a few more seconds without using her hands. After venting her anger, Second Miss Lu flew over the wall. Li lay on the grass and looked at the moon. He took out the handkerchief from his pocket. When he thought about the look in the woman's eyes when he left, he couldn't help but feel a chill in his heart. As the legitimate daughter of a duke, she was willing to be a concubine so that she could be with the person she loved. She had persevered for 20 years and suffered indifference and criticism, but in the end, all she got was the news that the other party was no longer in this world. For someone who was infatuated with love, after experiencing such a thing, they would probably go crazy. If she could not get over the shock of this matter, the tragic ending was almost certain. She shook her head helplessly and thought to herself, damn it, what kind of sin did I commit? The capital was indeed too complicated. I'd better go back to Qing'an Prefecture. Shall Huan Rui wait for me? She didn't sleep well that night. She woke up early in the morning with dark circles under her eyes. She washed her face with cold water in a daze and woke up. As usual, she had to greet the old mistress in the morning. Rui had passed before her, and now she was enjoying the treatment of a young mistress in the Li mansion. Even Li couldn't compare to her. When you go out, take some money from the accountant's office. All these years the Li family owes the He family a lot. The old mistress sighed and said when Li was about to leave. Li paused and smiled. Thank you, grandmother, but there's no need. I have enough money here. When he left, Rui brought him a lot of money. Everything in the Li family was used and there wasn't much to spend outside. Li didn't lack money. I'll have someone send the money to you. This is what the Li family owes them. The old mistress shook her head and said with a complicated expression, It's reasonable for you to do this. The capital isn't a good place for them. It's better for them to leave as soon as possible. The money is enough for them to live without worrying about food and clothing. Her son, who was supposed to inherit the Li family and decide the rise and fall of the Li family, refused the marriage with the House of Duke and eloped with an ordinary woman. This caused the family to lose face. The old mistress also had resentment in her heart. However, 20 years had passed and both of them had passed away. The old mistress didn't want to talk about the past anymore. Li didn't want to trouble the Li family with this matter. He bowed his head and left. In the backyard, Li Mingza's wife, Madame Fong, looked at him with dissatisfaction and asked, Do you know that he took all the He family members away? Li Mingza was tidying up his official robes. When he heard this, he said, This is what he should do. If it wasn't for the He family, the Li family wouldn't be like this. They owe us, we don't owe them anything. The old mistress wants to take 1,000 silver from the accountant's office to give them. What right do they have? Madame Fong said angrily. You don't need to care about this matter anymore. Li Mingza tidied up his official robes, glanced at Madame Fong and strode out. Looking at his departing figure, Madame Fong's eyes flashed with resentment. She muttered, I don't care. If I don't care, your position as the head of the family will be taken by someone else. Leaving the Li family is one thing, but why did you come back? Li Minghan is short-sighted and unscrupulous. His son isn't any better. He will only cause the Li family to decline even earlier. I'm doing this for the Li family, for you? Madame Fong looked out the door and said coldly, The old mistress has become muddle-headed. There's still me. I definitely won't let the Li family be destroyed by an outsider. Is the third young lady inside? In the Chen family, a middle-aged man asked the servant girl at the door. Yes, the third young lady is inside, the 15 or 16-year-old girl said with a trembling voice as if she was about to cry. What are you afraid of? Chen Chong glanced suspiciously at the servant girl, then pushed open the door and walked in. Behind the curtain, an exquisite woman sat by the bed. A smile appeared on Chen Chong's face as he said, Miaoyu, the plum blossoms on Mount Han are just in time. Let the servant girls accompany you to take a look. Don't you like worshipping Bodhisattva the most? While you're at it, you can also go to the Cold Mountain Temple to take a look. Worshipping Bodhisattva, even if it's worshipping Bodhisattva, what's the use? It's all fake, it's all fake. The woman's voice was hoarse as she muttered. If you don't want to worship, then don't. Today's weather is very good, so it's not bad to take a look at the plum blossoms. There were not many taboos between siblings. When Chen Chong lifted the curtain and gazed in, his expression suddenly changed. It had only been half a day, but the woman's waterfall-like black hair was already grizzled and her face haggard, as if she had instantly aged 10-some years. Miaoyu, what's wrong? How did it become like this? Chen Chong was shocked. Quickly walking over, he grabbed her arm and asked. Dead, he's dead. The woman's eyes were lifeless as she muttered to herself. Who's dead? Chen Chong immediately asked. Minghan's dead. How could Minghan die? She still hasn't married me. Seeing the haggard appearance of his little sister, who had once been doted on by everyone, Chen Chong's eyes almost popped out of their sockets. Striding out, he grabbed the arm of the young woman outside the door and coldly said, Speak, just what happened? The young woman shuddered and knelt on the ground with a thud. The Li family, my Chen family and you, will not rest until one of us is dead. After a moment, an incomparably cold voice rang out, seeming to come from the underworld. All the servants of the Chen clan in the courtyard couldn't help but shiver. Chapter 332. This damned weather, it's so cold. Li walked out of the courtyard with his arms crossed. It was a sunny day yesterday, but it started to drizzle in the morning. The temperature dropped instantly. He was only wearing a thin shirt, and the cold wind wrapped in the drizzle hit his body. He felt a little cold. Old mistress said yesterday that the rain was coming. It might rain in the next few days. She asked him to wear more clothes. If he didn't listen to the elders, he would suffer. He should listen to the elders in the future. Li couldn't help but admire the wisdom of the ancient people. They separated the 24 solar terms and created the most primitive meteorology. They could accurately predict the change of seasons and climate. On the rain day, it would rain when it was said to rain. However, it was reasonable to say that after this sunny day, the weather would gradually get warmer. It was a chilly spring. A cold wind blew again. Li tightened his clothes and decisively gave up on the plan to go out. Everything was fine in the courtyard of the inn. High Duke Qin seemed to have settled down for the past 2 days. They didn't cause trouble for them anymore. The guards of the Crown Prince's residence were bored to death. They were eager to catch a few ignorant thieves to relieve their boredom. This directly caused the people in the inn to take a detour when they passed by the courtyard. Just yesterday, Li Yi had also met his only uncle. He was a middle-aged man who looked very sturdy. He was even sturdier than old Fong. He usually worked outside to support the family. The only reason the remaining women and children of the He family had been able to survive for so many years was because of this pillar of support. His uncle was also married in the early years. Later they divorced for some reason. It was probably related to the pressure of the Qin family. In this way his mother's people were all gathered. The capital was a place of trouble. They should hide as far away as possible. Although Qing and prefecture was not as big as the capital, it was still one of the top 3 prefectures in the Jing kingdom. Most importantly, it was filled with his own people. They could do whatever they wanted. 1 against 3. The little fatty threw 2 hard cards in his hand. 1 against 5. Li Yi took the opportunity to slip 2 cards. King Bomb. Mississippi Lu's disharmonious voice sounded. Another King Bomb? Li Yi looked at Lu Rui suspiciously. Could it be that she had used the shadowless hands to cheat? No matter how lucky she was, it was too suspicious for her to win every round of Fight the Landlord. Li Yi dispelled his suspicions when he recalled that he had dealt the cards in the previous 2 rounds. He gestured for her to continue. She was using a sledgehammer to kill a chicken. She threw the bomb down so quickly. Let's see how she's going to win. Little girl, you're just a rookie who just learned how to play landlord. You're still too inexperienced. Straight. Mississippi Lu threw out all the cards in her hand and took 2 pieces of silver from Li Yi and the little fatty. Li Yi was stunned while little fatty had a bitter look on his face. He had brought mahjong and poker with him, but he couldn't play more than 2 rounds before he was beaten to death by these newbies. Li Yi decided to go out and cool down. The rain outside was actually not heavy. At best, it could only be regarded as a drizzle. The whole world was shrouded in a thin layer of mist. The distant mountains were hazy, and the houses became a group of shadows. It looked quite artistic. Originally, he just wanted to wander on the street with an umbrella to relieve the depression of losing a few taels of silver to Mississippi Lu. Before he knew it, he had wandered to the front of a familiar mansion. Young master, you're here to look for His Royal Highness, right? I'll bring you in now. The gatekeeper of Li Xian's estate had learned his lesson this time. When he saw a familiar figure in the distance, he immediately jogged over with a smile on his face. He was like a completely different person compared to his previous arrogant self. He didn't plan to look for Li Xian, but since he was already here and had nothing to do, he might as well go in and see how his research was progressing. Young master, please wait here for a moment. I'll go inform His Royal Highness immediately. After bringing Li Yi to a spacious hall, the gatekeeper immediately retreated. Li Yi stood at the door and admired the rain outside. There was a plum tree in the corner of the front yard. The petals had been scattered by the wind. Li Yi walked out and saw the petals all over the ground. He couldn't help but feel pity. If these petals were collected, they would be good ingredients for making perfume. Plum-scented perfume could only be made in this season. It was a pity that he was far away in the capital and didn't have time to make these things. Otherwise he would definitely make a fortune after a while. After a moment of regret, Li Yi turned around and walked back. A few figures walked out from the corridor on the left. Li Yi subconsciously raised his head to look, and when he saw the figures walking towards him, he stopped in his tracks. Damn it! He scolded in his heart. Wasn't it better to stay at home and play landlord? Why did she come out to wander around? Why did she have to come to the Crown Prince's residence? She came, then so be it. Why did she have to come out to see plum blossoms? She wasn't Lin Dayu. Why did she feel pity for a pile of petals? She can't see me, she can't see me. Li calmed himself down and silently recited this incantation in his heart. He slowly walked forward as if nothing had happened. When one foot crossed the threshold, a voice came from behind him. Stop. Li turned around and looked at the beautiful woman walking towards him. He asked with a puzzled expression, Young lady, are you talking to me? When he said this, his voice changed. Before the beautiful woman could speak, a young girl beside her glanced at Li and said in a bad mood, Is there anyone else here besides you? Li stared at the young girl. His meaning was obvious. Bah, you are the one who is not human. The young girl was very smart and immediately understood Li's meaning. A trace of anger appeared on her pretty face as she rebuked him. Ignoring the arrogant young girl, Li bowed to the beautiful woman politely and asked, May I know why this young lady asked me to stop? I haven't seen you for a long time and you have improved. I wonder how much you have learned in the art of changing your appearance and voice? The woman crossed her arms and a trace of a smile appeared on her lips as she looked at Li with interest. Li smiled awkwardly. What is this young lady talking about? This one does not understand. The woman looked at him with a smile that was not a smile. Her meaning was also very clear. Pretend, continue pretending. Royal sister, you know her? The young girl asked in surprise. Li sighed in his heart. Since he was so unlucky to meet her in the crown prince's residence, there was no point in continuing to pretend. He bowed deeply. Greetings, Princess Yongla. And me. The young girl glared at Li. Greetings. Cursing the broken rules of the royal family in his heart, Li scratched his head and looked at her and asked, What kind of princess are you? The old madam said that it would rain these 2 days, but she did not say to look at the almanac before going out. Li felt that today's almanac must have written, Good to play cards, avoid going out, avoid meeting friends. Why didn't the princess stay in the palace? Why did she wander around the crown prince's residence like him? What if she encountered an assassin? Of course, which blind assassin would dare to make her a target? It was purely because they were tired of living. A group of assassins would not be able to withstand a few slashes from her. What a coincidence today. Li Xian walked over from the front and gave Li an innocent look. Of all times, he had to bump into Emingzu when she was about to leave. Even if he wanted to hide it, he could only blame himself. Emingzu glanced at Li Xian with a rather unfriendly look. Li Xian knew that she was blaming him for hiding it. He smiled awkwardly and said, It wasn't easy for us to get together. Emingzu and Shanning will leave later. I just had someone make a yuanyang pot. Why don't we eat hot pot today? No, if we return to the palace late, Imperial Mother will blame us. The young girl shook her head repeatedly. Then she seemed to recall something and looked at Li Xian and asked, What is hot pot? Chapter 333. The Crown Prince's residence actually had green vegetables to eat in the middle of winter. Although they were shriveled and not very fresh, they were many times better than the vegetables that were stored in the cellar. It was really good to be born in the royal family. In such weather, fresh vegetables were more precious than gold. There were 4 people around the hot pot. It was a familiar scene. When he was in Qing and Prefecture, 2 members of the royal family often came here to freeload. This time they could finally freeload. The little princess refused to say anything about returning to the palace earlier. She carefully blew on the meat roll that had just been scooped out. After dipping it in the unique ingredients, she put it into her mouth unhurriedly with a satisfied expression on her face. Why did you come to the capital? Emingza looked at him and asked. I have something to do. I will leave in a few days. Li put some cooked vegetables in his bowl with serving chopsticks and answered casually. Li Xian had already asked this question once. It was quite complicated to explain. He was too lazy to explain it to her. It was more important to finish the meal and go home earlier. Emingzu said again, Tianfa has been used in the army. We will know how powerful it is in a few days. Li had no interest in heaven's punishment at all. She felt a little depressed in her heart. She was a princess of a country. What was the point of paying attention to these things all day long? Moreover, she had already seen the power of that thing. There was no doubt that in this era of cold weapons, whichever country the Jing state used gunpowder to deal with, that country would be out of luck. What is Tianfa? Li was not interested. Someone else was interested. Li Xian pricked up his ears and asked with a gossipy face. You will know in a few days. Li scooped out the last piece of cooked meat roll from the pot, which made the little girl opposite him look at him angrily. The matter of Tianfa couldn't be kept a secret. Half a month later, the Jing kingdom would win a great victory, and the army would return to the capital. Then, everyone would know about this peerless weapon that they had used to besiege the enemy. Once Tianfa makes a great contribution, my father will definitely reward you heavily. Emingzi continued. What? Li Yi stopped what he was doing. He looked up at her and asked, Why are you rewarding me? Then he realized something. He pointed at her angrily and said, You didn't keep your promise. Not me. Emingzi shook her head and said, I only found out about it later, but Imperial Father never sent anyone to find you. You should know how much he values you. Li Yi's mood immediately fell to the bottom of the valley. He had thought that the old emperor who was so busy every day would have long forgotten who he was. However, with something like gunpowder, no matter how stupid or muddle-headed he was, he would not pretend that he did not know. It seemed that he couldn't underestimate the highest authority in this country. God knew if there were any special agents or spies around him. He had to be careful in the future. The most depressing thing was that he couldn't figure out what he was thinking at all. Even if he were the emperor, he wouldn't be able to do such a thing. Even if he were the emperor, he wouldn't be able to do so. If he couldn't figure it out, he would just stop thinking about it. He would deal with it when it came. What he needed to do now was to fill his stomach. Humph, Imperial Father won't reward him. The little girl snorted coldly. Obviously, she was still brooding over the fact that she didn't snatch Li Yi's meat. What exactly is Tianfa? Li Xian looked at the two of them in confusion. He felt as if his heart was being scratched by hundreds of claws. Don't ask so much. Li Yi glanced at him and said, You will know when it's time to know. Seeing that both Li Yi and Emingzi remained silent on this matter, Li Xian nodded as if he understood. He really didn't ask any more questions. The knife skills of the chef in the Crown Prince's residence were obviously miles apart from Rui. The meat roll was not so thin and needed to be cooked for a long time in the pot. Just as Li Yi and the little girl were fighting for the meat, in a spacious hall in the Li family, the old mistress frowned. She looked at Li Mingzi, who had just returned from court, and said, Is the Chen family really going to kill us? The impeachment is a small matter. It's all groundless rumors. There's no need to worry. However, the impeachers are all close relatives of the Chen family. They must have been instructed by the public house, Li Mingzi said thoughtfully. All these years, although the Chen family and the Li family have been in constant conflict, they have never brought this matter to the table. Why? Li Mingzi was only halfway through his sentence when he was interrupted by Madame Fong. What else could it be? 20 years ago we made the Chen family lose face. 2 days ago, we beat up the Chen family's young master and protected the He family. If it was anyone else, they would not let it go. Madame Fong said angrily, At that time I told you not to interfere with the He family's matters. You didn't listen. Now the Chen family has started to make a move. How are we going to fight them? The old mistress did not say a word. Although Madame Fong's words were harsh, it was also the crux of the problem. Li Mingzi's face did not show any signs of nervousness. Which official had not experienced impeachment before? The Chen family's little tricks did not affect him much. At that moment, he thought of something and said, The third lady of the Chen family seems to have contracted a serious illness. After the court session, the emperor specially sent the royal doctor over. Could it be because of this? What a sin! The old mistress's mind flashed with the image of a young girl with a bright smile. She let out a long sigh and walked out with the help of her walking stick. A heart disease needs medicine to cure it. Third Mrs. Heart disease is not something that can be cured by medicine. I can only write a prescription for her to calm her mind. Lord Qin, you must remember to not let Third Miss suffer any more agitation. Imperial physician Lu Jimin walked out of the room and cupped his fists towards the middle-aged man who was waiting outside the door. In that case, I thank Imperial physician Lu. Qin Qing cupped his hands and thanked him. Official Qin is too polite. After sending off Imperial physician Lu, Qin Qing stood in front of his sister's room. Thinking of her haggard appearance, he sighed and did not push the door open to enter. Big brother, what did Imperial physician Lu say? Qin Chong walked over and asked with concern. Qin Qing shook his head. Qin Chong clenched his fists and gritted his teeth. That Li Minghan died too early. If he was still alive, I would definitely let him have a taste of living a life worse than death. Qin Qing knew that he doted on his third sister since young. He looked at him and said, The impeachment of Li Mingzi was all arranged by you, right? Qin Chong did not answer. Qin Qing sighed and said, As the dignified left assistant minister of the Ministry of Appointments, a few impeachments did not have much effect. In the imperial court, there are many people who are on good terms with the Li family. What you want to do is not so easy. Are you going to let third sister's death be avenged? Qin Chang's eyes were bloodshot as he gritted his teeth and said. Chapter 334. Look at the bigger picture. After a moment of silence, Qin Qing slowly said, Today, His Majesty has decreed that Qin Yu will be transferred to Cangzhou. He will take up his post immediately. This is a blow to our Qin clan. It seems like His Majesty is not happy with us. You are the future head of the family. I don't mind if you look at the bigger picture, Qin Chong coldly said, but the Li family ruined little sister's life. Seeing her like this, don't you feel bad? His Majesty's health is not well, and the position of Crown Prince has not been decided yet. The situation in the court is unstable and we cannot make enemies everywhere. The Li family's matter involves many people. Prince Ning is staying in the capital as the supervising inspector and has an ambiguous relationship with the Li family. Now is not a good time to make a move, Qin Qing said in a low voice. Are we just going to watch our little sister suffer like this? I can't take this lying down. Qin Chong gritted his teeth and said, then turned to leave. Qin Qing looked into the distance and clenched his fists. After a moment he slowly relaxed them. Take good care of the young miss, he ordered the servant girl at the door and left with a desolate back view. Oh, the Arabic numerals and the new method of counting that you taught me are gradually being implemented in the Imperial College. When the time is right, it can be implemented to the whole country. In the future, anything that requires counting will be much easier and more convenient. Her Royal Highness was always thinking for the whole world. She never forgot to talk about national affairs during meals. After making such a great contribution to the country, is there no small reward? Li looked at her and asked. What reward do you want? Emingzu thought for a moment and said, how about I ask father to make you a professor in the Imperial College and specialize in teaching mathematics? Forget it. Aren't you biting the hand that feeds you? Li Yi immediately decided not to reward him for being a teacher to a bunch of pedantic scholars. The little girl who was scooping up the mutton from the pot looked up at Li Yi and asked, What? That strange thing, it was you who made it? Li Yi thought to himself that the current emperor really did not pay much attention to the education of the princes. What did he mean by made it? The little girl glared at him fiercely and said discontentedly, So it's you. What kind of lousy number is this? I just didn't write it out. Or even hit my hand. It's all your fault. Do you still want to eat this piece of meat? Li didn't even look at her as he scooped up the last piece of mutton from the pot and asked. Eat. The little girl suddenly forgot about the slap on the hand and reached out to grab it without any regard for etiquette. This bad guy always snatched meat from her. If it was in the palace, she would definitely ask her father to beat him. However, in the palace she always ate with her mother. During the meal she was not allowed to speak. Even the position where she held the chopsticks was very particular. If she made any noise while eating, she would be scolded by her mother. In comparison, she still preferred this place. Furthermore, the food in the palace wasn't as delicious as the one here. Imperial Sister had just said that this delicious hot pot was made by this rascal. Based on this matter, she would forgive his rudeness. Elder brother Xian said that this bad guy's cooking was very delicious. When he returned to the palace, he would ask his imperial father to send people to capture him and make him cook for him every day. He would make him fight for meat with him. As this image appeared in her mind, the little girl couldn't help but laugh out loud. Li looked at the little princess with pity. He felt that she wasn't very favored in the palace. She was so happy to eat a piece of meat. So there were also different ranks of princesses. Poor child, she must be the lowest rank. After a satisfying meal at the crown prince's residence, the little princess was escorted back by the palace guards. Li Yi strolled on the streets to digest his food while the princess walked beside him. Since the matter of Tian Fa couldn't be hidden, our original agreement is now invalid. Li Yi said as he walked. No, I didn't say anything. Emingzu straightforwardly refused. You're acting shamelessly. Li Yi turned to look at her. We originally agreed that Tian Fa was discovered by Shen Liang first. The agreement was also built on this premise. Now that the matter has been exposed, the agreement naturally doesn't hold. I only promised you that I wouldn't tell my imperial father about this matter. Emingzu said lightly. I did this and didn't violate the original agreement, so the agreement is still valid. She wouldn't lie about this matter. Li thought about it carefully. What she said seemed to be the truth. At that time he didn't consider that the emperor would find out through other means. But why did he still feel so uncomfortable in his heart? If he had known that he couldn't hide it, he wouldn't have made the agreement. This was a big loss. Be careful. As he lowered his head gloomily, he suddenly felt a strong force on his arm and his whole body was pulled to the side. A carriage whizzed past him, raising a trail of smoke and dust. The pedestrians on the road all dodged. When the carriage passed, they couldn't help but curse. Li also wanted to curse. A few days ago in Qing'an Prefecture, he was almost hit by a guy riding a horse on the street. When he came to the capital, he almost had an intimate contact with a carriage. Damn it, he lived for 20 years in his previous life. How lucky was he to not be hit by a car? Even the streets of Qing'an Prefecture didn't allow horses to ride, let alone carriages that fast. Moreover, this was the capital. Li Yi felt that it was better to not be distracted when walking in the future. He turned to ask Mingzu, "Are all the carriages in the capital so fast?" "That's the envoy from the Qi kingdom," Mingzu said with a frown as she looked at the direction where the carriage was going. "No wonder," Li Yi murmured. Regardless of ancient times or modern times, the strongest fist was the last word. In today's situation, the Qi kingdom was the only superpower and had the strongest military force. The Jing kingdom was still being bullied by them. It was normal for them to be a little arrogant. They had the capital to do so. However, this was too damn arrogant. This was the capital of the Jing kingdom, and the envoy from a foreign kingdom was even more arrogant than the nobles in the capital. It seemed that the people of the Qi kingdom were extremely confident. With heaven's punishment, this time we must make the Qi kingdom pay the price. Mingzu clenched her fists and gritted her teeth. It seemed that she had been unhappy with these fellows for a long time. As a princess of a kingdom, she could only watch as foreigners swaggered around in her own land. How aggrieved must she be? These people wouldn't be arrogant for long. In today's world, if gunpowder was used well, it was no different from a nuclear weapon. Once heaven's punishment was used, the war horses would be useless and the cavalry of the other party would be useless. It was said that the cavalry of the Qi kingdom was the bravest. No one dared to resist their iron hooves. If the cavalry was useless, their combat power would be reduced by at least half. With a few clay pots thrown out, harvesting people was no more difficult than harvesting straws. Chapter 335. As a princess of a country, especially a leftover princess, what she should worry about the most was not marriage, but whether she would be sent to another country for a peace marriage, or whether she would be betrothed to some idiot from a minister's family. As a woman, her martial arts skills were unreasonably high, and she hated evil as if it was her enemy. She was full of national pride, wholeheartedly devoted to the country and the people, and always wanted to exploit others. No wonder she didn't get married even though she was so old. If all the princes of the Jing kingdom could be half as good as she was, after the death of the old emperor, the Jing kingdom would have no problem to maintain its power for decades. If nothing unexpected happened, after the war with the Qi kingdom, the Jing kingdom's deterrence among all the countries would increase by more than one level. Moreover, divine punishment was just the beginning. Gunpowder could not only be used as bombs but also guns and cannons. In the future they would be antiques, but in the present, they were definitely great inventions at the forefront of science and technology. According to the law of historical development, with the appearance of black gunpowder, these things should be born soon. Last time he suffered a big loss. This time, Li Yi didn't want to be the first bird to stand out. Anyway, divine punishment was enough for them to play with for many years. After saying goodbye to Mingzu, he walked back to the Li family alone. At the door he saw his second aunt, Madame Fong, and two maids getting into a carriage. Before Li Yi greeted her, she snorted coldly. As usual, she didn't even want to pretend to be kind. Li Yi didn't care. It was not the first time he met his second aunt, who was difficult to get along with. He could understand her resentment and dissatisfaction. After all, he was the eldest grandson of the Li family, the only child of the eldest branch. In the big families where the second and third branches were powerful, this was a principle that must be adhered to. Today there were many unfamiliar faces in the Li family. Madame Fong's 60th birthday was a very important day. In addition to close relatives and friends, those distant relatives who were only acquainted with each other would also come to celebrate Madame Fong's birthday. This was because the lifespan of most people was relatively short at this time. Living to the age of 60 was already a huge gain. For special birthday celebrations like the 60th and 70th birthdays, the rich families would hold a grand celebration. Everyone in the residence was busy as if it was the new year. In this way Li Yi seemed especially idle. Apart from copying scriptures and going to Li Xian's place to watch him fly a kite when he was tired, he would also give a few constructive suggestions. Most of his time was spent playing landlord with Mississippi Lu. Of course, it was impossible for two people to play, so the little fatty who was equally bored, was forced to join in. Lu Rui found all the luck she had lost in mahjong here. She lost a pile of snacks to the little fatty. Half of the silver that Li Yi had brought from Qing and Prefecture was already in her pocket. Mississippi Lu was never tired of a business that only made profits. Every time Li Yi lost badly and wanted to end the game, she would suddenly have the thought of testing his kung fu so the game could continue. As for the little fatty, it was even simpler. After Lu Rui taught him a few simple moves, the little fatty didn't care about his snacks anymore. He even took out his treasured things. It was just that after he tested the power of those moves, the parents of the younger generation in the residence came to find him. The next day he could only lie on the ground while playing mahjong. "Big brother, what do you think I should prepare for Grandma's birthday?" the little fatty said while lying on the soft mattress and rubbing his butt. The little fatty had been hanging around Li Yi recently and was used to letting him make decisions for him. Li Yi arranged the tiles in his hand and said, "As long as you don't want to give her your treasured candied plums and pastries, anything is fine." What? Having his thoughts read, the little fatty raised his head and stared at Li Yi with widened eyes. "My mother said that the gift has to be unique." With the little fatty's reminder, Li Yi remembered that as the eldest grandson, he also had to prepare a gift for old grandma. He couldn't afford something too expensive, but something too cheap showed no sincerity. He had to think about it carefully. While Li Yi was thinking about this, Lu Rui made a vague gesture with one hand. The little fatty understood and secretly passed a tile over. In the morning, Li Yi couldn't even afford a cheap gift. He borrowed a few dozen taels of silver from Mississippi Lu and wrote a promise that he would return double the amount when he returned. Only then did his wallet become a little fuller. The little fatty followed him like a bug. He promised the little fatty to fly on the kite for a while when he went to Li Xian's residence this time. A fine horse galloped towards them from behind, and Li Yi hurriedly pulled the little fatty along to avoid it. They watched as the armored knight galloped past them, quickly disappearing from their line of sight, leaving behind a messy street and the curses of the passers-by. The next time they met, he needed to remind the princess that it was time to discipline this kind of reckless galloping in the city. "Out of the way, out of the way." In a place where Li Yi couldn't see, the knight shouted in a hoarse voice, looking as if he hadn't slept for a few days and nights as he galloped straight for the palace gates. At this time in the throne room, the morning court assembly that usually ended a long time ago had been delayed by more than 2 hours. The current emperor sat on the dragon throne with a gloomy expression. The court was noisy as the civil and military officials were arguing over something. "Your Majesty, I accuse the envoy of the Qi kingdom of being presumptuous and reckless. He had recklessly galloped his horse in the city and injured several people. I sincerely ask for your Majesty to punish him according to the law." A young official stepped forward with a ceremonial tablet in his hand. The noise in the court stopped for a moment. Everyone looked at the young imperial censor as if they were looking at an idiot. He was a young man after all. Although this was what imperial censors did, there was still a time and place to do it. Was he talking about the envoy of the Qi kingdom who had recklessly galloped his horse? No one paid attention to the young imperial censor. An old man stepped forward and said, "Your Majesty, I think that ceding a city to the people at the borders can save us from suffering and reduce the casualties of our soldiers." "I second the motion." "I second the motion." As soon as the old man finished speaking, several more people stepped forward to express their support. *T. Every inch of the Jing kingdom's land was won by the blood and sweat of our soldiers. If the Qi kingdom wants it, we'll fight them with real swords and spears. What's there to be afraid of? *T envoy. They should be dragged out and beheaded. Do they really think that the Jing kingdom is a pushover? Your Majesty, give this old official 100,000 elite soldiers. We'll definitely wipe out the Qi kingdom. Emperor Jing rubbed the area between his brows as he watched the court hall turn into a wet market. A first-rank official was cursing like a shrew. When he looked down at the envoy of the Qi kingdom, his expression became even more gloomy. Chapter 336. The civil and military officials argued endlessly. The envoy of the Qi kingdom had an arrogant look on his face. In terms of national power, the Qi kingdom was a well-deserved hegemon. Although the Li royal family had once prospered and created a flourishing age, that was a matter of the previous dynasty. As an envoy of the Qi kingdom, he could stand tall in any country. I have something to say. At this moment, another person stood up. The voices of the people arguing became slightly weaker. This was because the person who stood up was the new capital governor, Dong Wenyun. He was favored by the emperor. His words played a decisive role in the current situation. What do you think, Dong Wenyun? Emperor Jing raised his eyebrows and asked. Dong Wenyun said solemnly, every inch of land in the Jing kingdom must be fought for. The ancestral teachings left by the great ancestors cannot be changed. Dong Wenyun only said one sentence and retreated to the side. However, he had directly expressed his position. In the court, many people frowned. Dong Wenyun was born a poor scholar and did not belong to any faction in the court. Now that he had shown his attitude, he stood opposite to the peace faction. An old man with white hair and beard said seriously, the Qi kingdom has a strong military force. If the stalemate continues, it will be disadvantageous to the Jing kingdom. Now that the national treasury is declining, it is difficult to continue. If the war continues, I don't know how many soldiers will lose their families. Your Majesty, please reconsider. Nonsense. The Qi kingdom has the heart of a tiger and a wolf. If we concede once, there will be a second time. What are you going to do then? Continue to retreat? An old general said angrily. In a few words, the court seemed to have developed into a vegetable market again. Emperor Jing could not hide his disappointment. There were many civil and military officials in the court, but there were countless extraordinary people. However, when they encountered real trouble, no one could help him solve his problems. Just as Dong Wenyun had said, the teachings of the ancestors could not be ignored. The Li family of the former Tang dynasty was so mighty that with a single command, all nations would obey. When would he be able to achieve this in his hands? He coughed twice and his chest began to feel stuffy again. Looking at the situation below, Jing Di could not help but feel sad. His panting became more and more serious. There was not much time left for him. A ghostly figure suddenly appeared outside the palace door. After a few flashes, it appeared beside Emperor Jing. Changde whispered a few words into Emperor Jing's ear. Emperor Jing suddenly raised his head. His eyes flashed and he asked loudly, "Really?" Changde nodded his head and said, "The messenger has been rushing about for several days to deliver the good news." After entering the palace, he fainted. I have already sent someone from the Imperial Physician's Bureau over. He took something out of his bosom and gave it to Emperor Jing. He said, "This is the report of victory. The wax is intact. Your Majesty, please take a look." When the good news was delivered to Emperor Jing, he couldn't help but open it and look at it. All right. After quickly skimming through the contents of the letter and seeing the seal of the great general at the end, Jing Di slammed the table and laughed out loud. All the civil and military officials raised their heads. They didn't know what happy event had happened. How could His Majesty be so happy at such a critical moment? Although you are the envoy of the Qi kingdom, you have to abide by the laws of the Jing kingdom in the territory of the Jing kingdom. This matter will be handled by the Supreme Court and handled according to the law. Jing Di stood up and looked at the young censor who had just spoken. He asked, "What's your name?" The young censor had just been scolded by his superior. At this time he had not recovered. When he heard His Majesty's question, he was stunned for a moment. "Answer His Majesty's question quickly." An old man beside him gently tugged at his sleeve. He was extremely puzzled. His Majesty had instructed the Supreme Court to handle this case. His intention was to severely punish the envoy of the Kingdom of Qi. However, the strange thing was that they had selectively ignored this matter just now. "Why, your humble servant is Song Lang," the young censor hurriedly said. "Very good. As an imperial censor, I am in charge of supervision. I should be impartial and follow the law." The officials in the court saw that His Majesty had avoided the most important matter that had been discussed recently. Instead, he was praising a small censor. They couldn't help but feel confused. What was wrong with His Majesty? The envoy of the Qi kingdom turned pale. He didn't know why the matter had taken such a sudden turn. What did the old man show Emperor Jing? Could it be impossible? Absolutely impossible. As he was thinking about this, a guard in the hall had already received his signal and led him away. "Your Majesty, the envoy's identity is special. You must not." The envoy represented the face of a country. If His Majesty punished the envoy of the Qi kingdom over a small matter, it would be a disgrace to the Qi kingdom. An old official's expression changed. He was about to speak when Emperor Jing impatiently waved his hand and said, "We have won a great victory at the border. The soldiers of the Jing kingdom defeated the Qi kingdom's army by 100,000. We killed 30,000 and captured 20,000. The rest fled in panic. General Su Dingyuan took advantage of the victory and pursued them. He has already taken 2 cities." As soon as Emperor Jing said this, the expressions of the officials in the court changed. They were dumbfounded. The first thought that came to their minds was that they didn't believe it. When did the invincible Qi kingdom's army become so weak? Not only did the Jing kingdom win, but it was a great victory. They had taken 2 cities. Were the soldiers of the Qi kingdom useless? How did they do it? How could the officials not know the strength of the Jing kingdom's army? This didn't make sense. Not to mention the civil officials, even the generals didn't believe it. At this moment, whether it was the peace faction or the war faction, everyone was thinking the same thing. Was His Majesty joking? However, even the most muddle-headed emperor wouldn't joke about this kind of thing. The whispers finally turned into earth-shaking cheers after they saw the victory report. The huge sound waves almost overturned the roof of the Golden Hall. The officials who couldn't calm down returned home. After they woke up, the news spread out with the capital as the center. That night, the emperor held a banquet in the palace and the curfew in the capital was lifted for 3 days. No matter where they went, there was a sea of cheers. All the citizens of the Jing kingdom could walk with their backs straight. They had never been as proud as they were today. They loudly boasted about the great achievements of the Jing kingdom's soldiers. They talked about how they defeated the millions of soldiers of the Qi kingdom with 50,000 soldiers and horses. They talked about how General Su Dingyuan was like a god who had descended to the mortal world. He summoned divine soldiers and generals to help him and beat the Qi kingdom's army. This was a grand event that had never happened in the decades since the establishment of the Jing kingdom. The tavern was open all night. Whether it was the scholars or the heroes of the Jianghu, they could all be seen in the small tavern. They recited poems and performed sword dances. For the past few days, the people of Qi living in the capital didn't even dare to step out of their houses. Li Yi learned from the princess that the envoy of the Qi kingdom was recuperating in the Honglu temple. He wouldn't be able to get out of bed for at least half a month. From this, it could be seen that people who exceeded the speed limit never had a good ending. Chapter 337. The power of Tianfa on the battlefield is far beyond our imagination. Different from Li Yi's focus, the princess was naturally not concerned about the envoy of Qi who was speeding. The messenger who had traveled thousands of miles to deliver the news of victory had fainted due to exhaustion after arriving at the imperial palace. Under the treatment of the imperial physician, he had woken up long ago and described the situation of the battle in detail. The Qi kingdom had a strong army and shared a border with the Jing kingdom. For decades, the 2 countries had been in constant conflict. The Qi kingdom's soldiers were brave and well-armed. On the battlefield, the lives of the Jing kingdom's soldiers were exchanged for the lives of the Qi kingdom's soldiers. The Qi kingdom's strength was deeply engraved in the hearts of the Jing kingdom's people. This was also the reason why the Qi kingdom's ambassador and the people of Qi could be arrogant and domineering in the capital of the Jing kingdom. However, the past could not be reversed. The Jing kingdom, which had been weak for a long time, could finally hold its head high. Under Tianfa there was no city that could survive within 3 feet. The war horses went out of control and the Qi kingdom soldiers covered their heads and fled like rats, begging for mercy. General Su Dingyuan not only defeated the Qi kingdom's army but also pursued them. He used the power of Tianfa to destroy 2 cities. When they ran out of food and fodder, he sounded the gong to retreat and stationed a large number of soldiers at the border. He would return to the capital soon. Before finding a way to break Tianfa, the Qi kingdom would not act rashly. Don't rely too much on Tianfa. After all, it is just an external force. In the end, it still depends on the bravery of the soldiers and the outstanding command of the general. If the other side also discovered the secret of Tianfa, the situation will only worsen. Li Yi reminded. Li Mingzhu nodded. She looked at him and asked, "The reason why we were able to win this time is because of you. What reward do you want?" "You're exaggerating. If you really want a reward, just make me a duke. It doesn't need to be too much. 10,000 taels of gold and 1,000 acres of fertile land. This request is not too much, right?" This time, Li Yi deliberately emphasized the words 10,000 taels of gold, to prevent them from fooling him with 10,000 copper coins again. Although it was said that being an official was tough, sleeping later than a dog and waking up earlier than a chicken, working tirelessly and fighting with all kinds of people, it was different to be an aristocrat who only took a salary and did not work. He had a beautiful wife and a big house. He did not need to work hard, and the country would help him achieve it. Every day he just had to lie in the courtyard, bask in the sun and tease the little servant girls. When he had nothing to do, he would go to the brothel to listen to music and watch erotic dances. How many years would he have to work hard for? Of course, after he brought Rui over, he could forget about being a concubine. She probably wouldn't agree. Even if she agreed, Mississippi Lou probably wouldn't agree either. Once she woke up, the concubine he had just married yesterday would probably have to go to the well to look for her. Not too much? Her Royal Highness looked at him with her arms crossed and said, "Since the founding of the country, there has been no title of nobility without military merit. It is as difficult as ascending to heaven to get the title of a county baron. How many dukes are there in the country now? 10,000 taels of gold and 100,000 taels of silver. Do you know how much money was spent on this expedition? If I reward you 2 more times, the national treasury will be empty. As for the 1,000 acres of fertile land, the perpetual farmland of a prince is only 10,000 acres. Do you think you can compare with 10 princes?" Li Yi looked at her with contempt. She was the one who took the initiative to ask him what reward he wanted. It seemed that she could not even satisfy one of them. How could she still pretend to be generous? Forget it. They can reward me however they want. I'd better watch Li Xian fly a kite. Li Xian was getting more and more playful. He had invited several machine masters to participate in the development of the glider. In just a few days, the glider had been modified to the point that even Li Yi himself couldn't understand it. Definitely don't think about becoming a duke. As a small county lieutenant without any title, it's impossible for him to become a first-class duke in a single step. Don't even think about 10,000 taels of gold. Even if father agrees, the court officials won't agree. 1,000 acres of fertile land is also a dream. How can there be so much fertile land to reward you? Li Yi rolled his eyes at Her Royal Highness who had followed him here. If he doesn't want to give it, then he doesn't want to give it. Is there a need to ridicule him like this? However, all your contributions are not small. Father is clear about rewards and punishments. He will definitely not treat you unfairly. You should be more serious. Don't always think about fooling around with him." Seeing Li Yi's absent-minded look, Mingzu frowned and said. Li Xian showed that he had been implicated even though he was not doing anything. He walked over and said discontentedly, "What do you mean by fooling around with me? I'm also sharing Uncle Emperor's worries. Think about it. If they could fly higher, wouldn't they be the best spies on the battlefield? How many soldiers, horses, provisions and fodder does the enemy have? How many routes they are divided into, how the terrain is, and where the ambush is? Wouldn't it be clear at a glance?" In order to prove that he was not fooling around with him, Li Yi added, "Think about it. If our people fly above the enemy and throw down all the heavenly punishment they carry, what will happen?" In his lifetime, Li Xian's creation of the most primitive bomber was something to look forward to. As long as something beneficial to the country was mentioned, Her Royal Highness would immediately become serious. She looked at the guard who could already fly over the treetops thoughtfully. "Your Majesty, the envoy of the Qi Kingdom has recuperated in the office of the Grand Herald for a few days. After presenting the memorial, he is ready to leave the capital." Emperor Jing did not seem to hear Changda's words. He played with a clay pot without a fuse in his hand and said, "It's a pity that I didn't see the Jing Kingdom soldiers defeat the Qi Kingdom's army with my own eyes." Subject Su's contributions in this battle cannot go unnoticed. He will be conferred the title of Great General who supports the kingdom. When the army returns, I will personally come out to welcome them and reward them. A rare smile appeared on Changda's dead face. This victory was of great significance to the Jing Kingdom. His Majesty's long-cherished wish was to make the Jing Kingdom stronger in his lifetime so that it would no longer be bullied by foreign countries. Now he had finally taken the most important step. With this battle, His Majesty's prestige would increase greatly. It would be enough to shut the mouths of countless people in the imperial court. Subject Yin reported today that the appearance of horseshoes has reduced the cost of horses by more than 60%. The Ministry of Justice has also submitted an official document, intending to vigorously implement the law of interrogation in Anxi County. If this law can be implemented in all counties, it will reduce many cruel officials. The Imperial Physicians Bureau has jointly submitted a petition to claim credit for Anxi County Lieutenant Li Yi. His cardiopulmonary resuscitation and suturing of wounds have made great contributions and can save countless lives. They are even more useful on the battlefield. In the battle with the Qi Kingdom, if not for his heavenly punishment, we would probably still have lost, let alone seize the city and expand the territory. Emperor Jing muttered to himself. One by one he was very familiar with the things that Li Yi had done in the past 6 months. I can see that he is an unexpected soldier. In terms of governing the country, most people in the imperial court are better than him. However, no one can replace what he can do. The smile on Changda's face deepened. He said, "Today is the 60th birthday of the old mistress of the Li family. That lazy boy can't wait to get as far away from the capital as possible. We must be careful that he doesn't run away." Emperor Jing smiled and said, "I am glad that I went to Qing and Prefecture that time. Otherwise, how could I have gained so much? Father, father?" A clear voice suddenly sounded from the door of the hall. A smiling figure ran in. The 2 guards behind her ran into the hall. They looked terrified and were about to kneel down to ask for forgiveness. Emperor Jing waved his hand and said, "That's enough. You can leave." Then, he turned his head to look at the little girl in palace attire and asked, "Shaning, why are you free to come to father's place today?" "I just came to see father." The little girl giggled and skipped over. Chapter 338. Jing Di held the little girl in his arms and gently scratched her nose. He said, "Tell me, why are you looking for me? You are not allowed to let me hit teacher." In the eyes of the courtiers and people, he was the emperor above all others. However, in front of his children he just wanted to be a good father. "Oh, I have already forgiven teacher for hitting him." The little girl twisted her body and said, "Shaning wants to eat hot pot." "What is hot pot?" Jing Di was startled. A trace of doubt appeared on his face as he asked. "Father doesn't know." The little girl was a little surprised. In her heart, her father was omniscient. She never thought that there was something that her father didn't know. After being surprised, she waved her little hand and said, "Then father, help Shaning catch a bad person and bring him into the palace." When he looked down and saw the little girl's eyes moving around, he knew that this was her purpose. He felt a little funny and asked, "Tell father which bad person dares to offend our Shaning." "Father, put him in prison to help you vent your anger." No. The little girl shook her head like a rattled drum and hurriedly said, "Father, you can't put him in prison. Otherwise no one will cook delicious food for Shaning." "Nonsense. Didn't I say not to eat outside? What does your sister think of you? You are not allowed to leave the palace in the future." Jing Di frowned and said, "I didn't eat indiscriminately at Brother Xian's house. My sister also ate and Brother Xian also ate. Shaning was very obedient and didn't eat indiscriminately outside." The little girl hurriedly explained, "Father took him into the palace and made him cook for Shaning. He was not allowed to eat. He was so angry that he stole Shaning's meat to eat. By the way, his name is Li Yi," the little girl said with a vengeance. "Li?" Hearing this name, Jing Di smiled and rubbed the little girl's head. He said, "Well, he dared to offend our Shaning. In 2 days, father will take him into the palace and specially cook for you, okay?" Father loves Shaning the most. A satisfied expression appeared on the little girl's face. She couldn't wait to see the scene in her imagination. The old madam's 60th birthday was a rare occasion for the Li family. The house was decorated with lanterns and streamers. Every few steps, a huge lantern was hung, illuminating the Li mansion as if it was daytime. The servants of the Li family stood at the door, ushering in the guests who came to celebrate the old madam's birthday. Li Mingze and Li Mingyuan would personally welcome the distinguished guests. Of course, welcoming the guests had nothing to do with Li Yi. He had only been here for a few days and did not know any of the guests. He sat far away and watched the guests come and go with boredom. It was not until today that he found out why the Li family could be stable in the capital for so many years, even if they did not get along with the High Dukes. In just 2 hours, 2 High Dukes sent gifts. Although they did not come in person, at least their attitude had been expressed. As for the other large and small families, there were countless of them. He had long heard that the water in the capital was very deep, and the relationships between the influential families were very complicated. For those families that had many years of inheritance, even if there was no successor, it was not that easy to topple them. It was rare that little fatty Li Yingkai didn't hold onto his snacks and gobble them down. He hid in a deserted corner next to Li Yi, shook his head and mumbled something. A few naughty kids who wanted to play with him were all sent away by him. Lu Rui was not by Li Yi's side. She was the only one who was favored by the old madam. After she brought mahjong to the Li family, the young and old madams who had nothing to do all day went crazy. The capital seemed to be a lucky place for Mississippi Lu. Today she won a pair of bracelets, tomorrow she won a hairpin. If she did not like it, she would give it to the servant girl sent by the old madam to serve her. In just a few days she became the most willing master of the Li family's servant girls. It was said that through her aunt, mahjong had begun to spread among the circle of the noble ladies in the capital. Taking advantage of this opportunity, the Li family's craftsmen made a lot of money. Of course, compared to the money Mississippi Lu made, it was only a drizzle. It seemed that Mississippi Lu did not intend to go back at all. She was carefree every day and made a lot of money. Li was in a hurry. In a few days, he would tell the old madam that his vacation was over and it was time to return to Qing Prefecture. After all, no matter how low the county lieutenant was, he was still an official and received a salary from the state. It was not advisable to work for free. Not far away, Li Mingze had just welcomed a person in. He excused himself and left in a hurry. The man in embroidered robes looked around. When his gaze swept past a certain place, his expression froze. He then strode over. "It's over. Big brother, I forgot again." The chubby boy walked over dejectedly and sat beside Li Yi. His round face turned bitter. Li Yi wanted to help but could not. Out of a humanitarian spirit, he helped the chubby boy find a suitable poem. When the time came, he would give it to the old madam to make her happy. Unexpectedly, the chubby boy could not memorize 4 simple lines of the poem after a long time. He could not help him memorize the poem, so he could only rely on himself for the rest. "Why don't you take out your precious candied plums?" Li Yi suggested. If he really could not memorize it, he would have something he could take out and it would not be too embarrassing. "No, let me memorize a little more. I'm almost there." The chubby boy refused to admit defeat and quickly squatted in a corner to recite. "It's really you?" A surprised voice came from the side. Li Yi turned his head and saw a middle-aged man in embroidered robes walking towards him. "Aren't you in Qing Prefecture? Why are you in the capital?" The man sat directly opposite Li Yi and asked in surprise. "You are the person who stole the plaque?" The middle-aged man looked familiar. Li Yi thought for a while and recalled his identity. "What do you mean by stealing the plaque?" The middle-aged man slammed the table and said, "Taking without asking is considered stealing, isn't it?" Li Yi replied indifferently. In his heart, he was recalling what Professor Feng and Magistrate Dong had said to him that day. The man was a high-ranking official in the capital and seemed to be the assistant minister of the Ministry of Personnel. There were 2 assistant ministers in the Ministry of Personnel, and one of them was Li Mingze, his second uncle. This Sir Yin in front of him should be the right assistant minister of the Ministry of Personnel. Thinking about it this way, it was not surprising that he came to the old madam's birthday banquet. "Didn't I tell you when I took it?" Li Yi had nothing to say in response to the assistant minister's bold and confident words. That was indeed not stealing but robbing. "Why are you in the Li family?" "All right, your surname is also Li. Are you a distant relative of the Li family and are you here to celebrate the old madam's birthday?" "That can't be right. I've never heard of the Li family having any distant relatives in Qing Prefecture." The middle-aged man was obviously unwilling to argue with Li Yi about whether it was stealing or robbing. He looked him up and down and asked in confusion. Qing Prefecture, your name is Li Yi." After looking Li Yi up and down, the middle-aged man suddenly realized something and revealed a surprised expression. "You are Li Minggen's son. That you're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.